Welcome to the PT Solo Interviews Part 2. Hello, I'm Angela Stevenus. I interviewed 22 talented gamers who cleared Pilgrim's Traverse solo and asked what their thoughts were on their experience. Be sure to check out Part 1 if you haven't already, as the aforementioned gamers introduced themselves and their experiences with Deep Dungeon. In Part 2, we'll dive deeper into what everyone thinks is challenging to them, and where Pilgrim's Traverse compares to either the other Deep Dungeons or other content in Final Fantasy XIV. Does everyone believe Pilgrim's Traverse is on the easier side, or was their first solo clear one of the more difficult challenges they have done in all of Final Fantasy XIV? If you'd like to see more videos like these, be sure to let me know in the comments below. As it's the first time I am doing something like this, your feedback would be greatly appreciated and may determine if I do more in the future. Please enjoy the stars of the show, the community. Was PT solo challenging in comparison to other things you have done in the game?
So this is actually a really tough question to answer for me because personally, I do think it was a challenge. And in terms of pure difficulty and preparation, I think I would say I did the same amount of prep I did for soloing PT as I did for, on content through or top when Dawn Trail launched. I've done quite a bit of Savage and Ultimate rating, and I've cleared, I think, most of the ultimates in the game. But I think even compared to those, I would say the PT solo challenge felt a little bit, I wouldn't say it was easier. I think it was quicker because I only had to rely on myself. And when I say quicker, I mean sort of the learning curve on it because, I sort of think I'm a person who learns patterns pretty quickly, especially when I get reps on them. So when I do something like an ultimate, it's a very static sort of list of things that can happen. I treat ultimates almost like a dance where, there's a choreography and you just got to follow it. It's going to happen the same way every single time. But I feel like with something like a Deep Dungeon solo, especially PT, or actually just all of them in general, the challenge wasn't, the fights or the mechanics. Although I will say that the floor 50 quicksand boss, that was horrible. I think that was the only boss to kill me in my solo run. But I think the difficulty was in the variability, especially with I know we've talked a little bit about it, but the Pomander power. I think it's just sort of all of it led to this big challenge where there wasn't as many, moments where I could make a mistake and know like I would be fine. Witching was the only real palm that got me out of danger if something went wrong. Maybe Bark Bomb would help here and there, but the votives, even those were a gamble. So I think on my solo run, I ended up with a lot of like poor effects, especially on the 90 set. So with less tools, I really had to focus and consider every action that I took carefully. And I think it's that patience and that sort of concentration over a lengthy period of time that I think makes soloing a Deep Dungeon on par, honestly, with ultimate content for me, at least. Because with ultimate content, the first few times we walk into a new mechanic, we pull, we get the reps, I learn. But at some point, it becomes muscle memory and you sort of just like stop consciously thinking about it. Depending on the mechanic, there's only a set number of ways it can even work out. So you can really even just memorize the sort of random variability there. But with Deep Dungeons, I think the difficulty is in the fact that every time I step onto a floor, even if I know what the enemies do, they never do. It never plays out the same way every time. So I am left to my own devices a lot more. So to me, that is the thing that makes PT solo challenging.
Very much appreciate that comparison to like ultimates and raids, because that is one that I don't have any experience on, and I've always been interested to hear other people's thoughts on that, like other aspects of the game, because in reality, like for me, it's just I'm kind of like down the mid, like only solo or PvP or something, but they're so different. But yeah, it's always been this kind of big comparison about how do you feel the ultimates are, the savages, etc. How does it compare to solo? So I appreciate that perspective very much. So
to me, not really. I mean, I've gotten a lot better at the game since I started it, and since when was it? A bit over a year ago, or sometime last year, I cleared Uwu and Yukob. And, well, those are the only ultimates I've done, but, like, they still felt a lot more challenging, I feel. Obviously, it's a very different, like, type of challenge. But yeah, and, I mean, I started soloing Deep Dungeons in August, as I said, and like sort of in preparation for PT, because I'd kind of wanted to like go into solo it. Like I knew that out of the gate. because I've always had like a lot of respect for people who do solo deep dungeons. But yeah, like having the experience from doing previous deep dungeons, even if I didn't clear them in the end, it still helped a lot and made it like noticeably easier.
Interesting. So, if you had to say, like, with your knowledge of both your ultimate rating and I'm sure your other rating and the deep dungeon, would you say in PT it was more your rating knowledge that helped you, or would you say it was more definitely or more the deep dungeon experience that you had that kind of carried you through, like, kind of the overall PT solo?
Like, it's a combination of both, for sure. Yeah, the deep dungeon knowledge mostly for, like, does help with just generally knowing how the content works. I didn't have to spend any time sitting around and figuring that out, essentially. Or, like, more than other people doing it would. But no, for, like, knowing when to get out of mob AoEs, all of that. That's definitely also the writing experience, just coming through on snapshots and like being able to just read telegraphs.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's definitely a perspective that I don't have because I'm only kind of one side of it. So it's interesting to see like where the gamers kind of have and where they pull their experience from for
Yeah.
sure. So I appreciate that.
I would say personally, no. It was not challenging for me because I've done raiding, I've done ultimates, like I've cleared every other deep dungeon solo. So I think having all that experience going into PT made it a little bit easier because as I was climbing, it just felt execution based, which I feel I had so much experience for that. But I think for beginners, it can be a little bit challenging. I've talked to a couple of friends that they're still trying to climb and they find it challenging as well. And I'm like, you know what? That's respectable. Some people are gonna find it challenging, some people won't.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that carryover knowledge is so big for the veterans that, it's like, I don't know how you feel, maybe you agree with me, but like, there wasn't too, at least in my opinion, there wasn't too much that challenged us with PT with having that previous knowledge, right? And that's not necessarily to say that's a bad thing, but kind of when you're looking for something to trick you up or to give you some trouble, it's like it kind of felt like it was more of the same. Did that make sense, right? Like there wasn't
Yeah.
something too variants that was like, oh my god, I've never seen this before. I mean, yeah, there were some enemies that were interesting for sure, but anything that you had from previous deep dungeons, more so maybe EO, that all carried over. So that from our perspective, it wasn't anything overly new. Whereas, of course, like the new gamers that are going in, it is new to them, right? So a lot of that kind of years of knowledge isn't there for them. So they're trying to build that up from that point.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. Like, and you've probably seen it through the Discord, or like even on Twitter. A lot of the veterans, like, we just didn't get that challenge from solo, and that's probably due to all our experience coming from like Palace, EO, even on Heaven on High. Like, we all have these many clears, and like you said, as opposed to new players, like it's probably gonna be challenging.
Yeah, and that's completely fair, right? I mean, something brand new, it's going to be challenging to anyone, anything. You do something you've never done before, it will be initially challenging. How long it takes to get through it, that is up for millions and millions of debates. Now, with your kind of rating experience with everything, and maybe kind of keeping it within the shell of Dawn Trail, if you were to position PT in the category that you have for rating, right? You have normal, extreme, savage, ultimate. Where do you feel like you'd put PT?
Are you asking coming from like a veteran standpoint, or or just in general?
I would say in general. I mean, even with the experience that you have, right? I would say like, okay, if the content was ultimate level or like a really, really, really hard difficulty, no matter what it presented to you, you probably would still categorize it as an ultimate, right? I mean, giving a credit to what the content had given it. So I guess in that
Yeah.
respect, knowing what you know, how you went through experience, even if you like related to your blind run, like where would you kind of put that, at least in like a rating kind of category of difficulty?
I would honestly put it as an extreme. And the reason behind it is there's some extremes that if people do, they'll find it a little bit difficulty, like a little bit challenging, maybe not. But you always get like that small surge at the end in an extreme, like it can be. And I feel like PT from coming from a new person, like yeah, if you don't have the knowledge, you're kind of gonna be like, oh, what do I have to do? Like, what palms do I have to use? What do these mobs do? Like you go into that panic mode because most of us when we started, we all went through that.
Well, not really. It did take me slightly longer than a year. So, for context, when PT released, I did a group run to floor 80 on day 1, and another one like day 2, and then I did 4 serious solo attempts to clear. EO was kind of similar, though I cleared it a day earlier than my runs in PT, just from when it released. Palace took me 26 runs, and Heaven on High took me 31 runs. I used Excel sheets to track everything back then effectively. It's really tough though. Clearly, Square Enix is wanting to design dungeons that are increasingly more mechanically complex. And that is not a wrong decision, like I just mentioned, but it's just not feasible to have both that and like Heaven on High-esque damage values. It's not impossible, but it's not realistic for them to try and do. That all being said, I think solo Deep Dungeon and even PT is significantly harder than most other content in the game. POTD and Heaven on High both being comfortably harder than the ultimates I have experience with, which is UCOP and I'm currently playing Dragonsong Reprise. And EO and PT being like Savage level, I think. They're mechanically easier, but they're significantly more punishing in terms of the consistency that is needed to clear them, if that makes sense.
I would say it's more annoying rather than challenging. And what I mean is, it's more about the luck factor, I think, is the issue. Yes, there's a lot of things you can predict in Deep Dungeon. Like, oh, you know that there's gonna be like, I guess, gloom there, like on the last floors. Or you can not drop a raising, I think was it? Like you cannot drop it in the last 20 floors or something. Someone told me. What I also don't like is like that's not a problem in ultimates and stuff because it's like 8-man and stuff. And it is also annoying if someone DCs, but DCing in a Deep Dungeon solo is way worse than in ultimate. Yeah, in ultimate it's like some minutes only. In Deep Dungeon, if you like, for example, at the very end and then you DC, it's over. Everything you like worked for is gone. It is literally gone. And that happened to me actually recently with Heaven and High twice.
Oh.
And that was luckily it was only floor 30, 40, but it was really not fun. Literally not fun. And especially, I can imagine it would be way worse at the end. Like if you like, for example, at 100, you want to run to the thing where you like finish it, and then all of a sudden, oh, you DC'd, or servers are down. It's just not fun. And I think during the run, I did PT solo. I even streamed it. I think I was so frustrated. I think I was just frustrated because of like, oh, gloom, oh, so many traps there, oh, and I don't know. It was just maybe it's a skill. Obviously, it's a skill issue. But it was my first time soloing PT, of course, you know. But it's just not as challenging as what I usually do. That's what I would say. Can I compare?
Okay, so I guess another way to also say it is like the challenges that were presented from the Deep Dungeon were not necessarily what you would consider like a challenge that you necessarily want to engage with, I guess is another way to say it. Or
Yeah,
rather...
basically. Yeah, what you said right now. Yeah, different challenge. It's not challenging. It's just more annoying. And ultimate is, for example, that is for me a challenge. Actually, that's my thought process.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Like I've always kind of said that too. Like there are ways to in any video game that like a game challenges here, or there's difficulty settings here, but it could be challenging to you in one aspect, but for someone else it just is, like you said, annoying or just not challenging. It's like really easy. But it's kind of a very subjective thing into what you find challenging, like hard and difficult, etc. I was and that's one of the perspectives I was very interested in because like the ultimate and the rating is completely out of my realm, and I've always been interested to hear what like gamers like yourself feel about that translating it over to like a Deep Dungeon and everything. So thank you for that.
True. I mean, the good thing is I can use my knowledge from the ultimates to the Deep Dungeon. Actually, like. You know, actually, this is super rare to see. We can actually use interrupts. That is, or like slowness, like or like I think heavy was it, or like binds, like or like there's niche things that I wish Ultimate has, but we don't have that. But it's more often used in Deep Dungeon actually. Also, kiting, for example, kiting is something we don't have, like in Ultimates.
So you would enjoy, or you do enjoy the idea of kiting?
I would enjoy more if they put it in Ultimates, for example. Yes, and that's what PT kind of showed a bit, you know. And yeah, I actually liked it.
So I've thought about this for a while and where I would rank it. I kind of settled on it's like an early Savage tier and early Savage floor in terms of difficulty because it's nothing in terms of the challenge is exceptionally difficult. And if you're on a tank, there's actually very little jeopardy for you until I think like floor at least 80 or 90 in terms of boss fights. There's very little jeopardy I felt because when I was trying to learn how to do the mechanics as a tank, you can tank privilege your way through most of it. I mean, I didn't, for the example, the antlion where you get the knockback and you're supposed to dip your feet into the quicksand to not get knocked back. I didn't figure that out, so I just all right, I'll just take I was trying to like arm's length it every time, and then I was like, well, how do I knock back it when my arm's length is on cooldown? So I just took the bleed every time and put a Pilgrim pot on, and the sustain was more than enough, and I just like, all right, I'll just dodge the trailing AoE, and if I'll take the bleed. So like there were just times when it wasn't that challenging, like in terms of, like it wasn't punishing for failure. Like if you I feel like in Savage, if you get the punishment for failing a mechanic is a lot greater. So I've been putting it like an early tier, like a first tier of an expansion, Savage difficulty, or maybe even like a more difficult extreme. That's kind of the ballpark I've been putting it in my mind. The thing that makes it challenging for me at least was working on time management in floors 90 and above, or 80 and above, maybe 90 and above, and that's where the challenge came for me. It was like managing my time, making sure I get through and find the exit. I think on one of my practice clears, the exit room was on the other side of a treasure room, so I was like, all right, because I came in at 70, I didn't have quite the resources to deal with it, so I made sure that when I cleared that I was gonna have a poison fruit just in case that I ran into that. But yeah, I think it is challenging. It's and I think it's early savage floor.
So would you say, like, if you felt like you got punished harder, that would kind of increase the overall challenge for you?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Because you get a vuln stack or you get a damage down, and it's not. I mean, if you're running palms, it's not. I didn't find that challenging. Like it's like, oh, running palms, it'll be fine. I was gonna make the DPS because there's no enrage. I was like, oh, I'm always gonna make the DPS check as long as I don't run out of time. And I was routinely, one of the pieces of advice someone gave me was to know how long it takes to kill every boss. So I was like, all right, well, if I know that I would give myself a couple extra minutes in case something went wrong or in case I had to hit a re-raiser. But like I never worried about killing the boss. I was always worried about getting to the boss in time. Like, but once you get to the boss fight, I considered that I'm like, all right, I'm home free. I just have to do some mechanics. These mechanics are not that punishing, and I'll be okay. I felt pretty confident when I got to the boss. I was always worried about the dungeon in between, the deep dungeon part of the dungeon.
So just to kind of side a little bit, what kind of rating experience do you have in the game? At least with like some of the more challenging things in the game. Like what kind of experience do you have?
So, I mean, I've done all the Savage fights. I've done all the ultimates. I did Q40 in week 1. I've done, and I usually get this expansion. I've been getting week 1 clears on all the Savage fights, either as tank or caster. So I've done okay. I mean, I'm not a world racer. I certainly don't have that kind of ability, but I usually join ambitious week 1 groups and usually get a week 1 clear. That's usually where I'm at. I learn mechanics pretty quickly. I think that's like my strong point. I don't know if my rotation's ever optimal, but my strong point is I think I learn mechanics quickly.
Gamer. So based on your experience with PT, if this could be a short or a long answer, what would you feel would give it still bouncing up your, the punishment equaling challenge? What would you kind of do to the content, or what would you think in your mind that would just all of a sudden make it just a little bit more challenging in your thought of it?
So the things that can make it more challenging are when you don't do a mechanic correctly, the punishment in ultimate or in savage or in extreme is you get a vuln stack, or you just die, or you get a damage down that is, I think someone told me that in like the ultimates it's like a 90% damage down, which makes any DPS check unclearable. And I think like what would make it difficult is, I mean, a step up would be from where it is now. If you fail a mechanic, for example, you get a damage down. You can still learn the mechanic, how the fight is, you can still keep fighting and how the fight is done, but the damage down will make the fight either take an exceptionally long time, or you just won't. The damage down is such that you can't clear. Maybe you can't clear the fight. I think that's sort of how you get a step up in difficulty, right? It's like you can still do the fight if you have a damage down, but you don't clear because you will either run out of time or there's some sort of enrage. And I don't think deep dungeons need a particularly difficult enrage, especially if you're like on a tank. Or someone told me that I don't play any healers, but someone told me that Scholar is a particularly difficult one to do damage on, to get high damage on in a solo dungeon. So I would imagine that if you could, if failing a mechanic or not doing a mechanic then contributed to making the rest of the fight more difficult, I think that's how you step that up. So the other side, if you get a bone stack, for example, maybe it doesn't wear off after a minute, it wears off after longer, and if you keep failing that mechanic over and over, you just keep stacking up bone stacks, and eventually the boss will just auto you to death.
For me specifically, no. I tried to score my first run even. I got like a 191 or something around that. I didn't like hardcore score like the other hardcore scorers in the community. I want to say in quotations light scoring. I know a lot of people don't like that term, but I just wanted to see how far I can push it first try while remembering what all of the mobs do. Black Mage felt really strong in it, probably because Black Mage at level 100 just does a lot of damage. It has a lot of instacasts, so you can explore while killing stuff. It felt really good. I'm not saying, oh, it's overpowered, that's bad, it shouldn't be like that. It felt very fun to play in there. I did enjoy it a lot. In comparison to the other deep dungeons, I don't think it was challenging at all, especially because I finished the last 2 sets with like over 30 minutes left on my first solo attempt. Being able to basically LOS 95% of the mob cast just feels like cheating almost. And I'm saying that this is my opinion. I'm not saying that's like the general opinion everybody should have. That is just my opinion. People are free to agree or disagree. If you're in a tight spot, of course, it feels nice to be able to just LOS something without aggroing 3 mobs. But in general, if you're just fighting mobs one by one, you don't know what something does. Well, you just go hide behind the wall and you're fine. Again, most of the time there's stuff that goes through walls. I'm aware of that. But in general, you only really need to learn the stuff that can't be LOS'd and then do that mechanic and LOS everything else if you want the clear, I guess. That's how it felt to me. I don't think time specifically was an issue. That probably was the case because I was on a DPS. Oh, well, back then, so I thought, because I did the healers afterwards, and I started from 71 without palm enders, and I still wasn't pressed on time at all. A lot of it, of course, comes from experience. I'm not saying everybody can do that, and if someone can't do that, I don't want to feel them discouraged. I'm not calling anybody bad or something like that. It's difficult to compare. It's like if someone puts me in a savage fight I've never done before, of course I'm going to fail a lot at the start, right? And I have to learn the mechanics and where to move and what to do. So if someone has never done Deep Dungeon before, it's similar to that, right? Where they have to get a feeling for it, they have to experiment, they have to figure out what's working for them. So it's like 2 sides of the same coin, basically. Comparing PT to something else I've done in the game, I don't think there's nothing comparable outside of the other 3 deep dungeons, which I think EO probably comes closest because EO is very similarly designed in terms of the mob mechanics, where it's mostly hidden telegraphs that kill you if you don't respect the mechanic. But in EO, especially on the higher sets, you don't really have the chance to LOS the things, so you do have to respect them. But overall, I don't think PT solo was not challenging. Funnily enough, my group runs with the people I've done, that was more challenging, because not only did we have to pay attention to what the mobs are doing, but we didn't just go into the same room. We were wandering around, not staying together and just spreading out. So that was sometimes a challenge to like keep track of what everybody else is doing, especially as the tank. I was the only interrupt in the group. So if 2 DPS pulled out a mimic in 2 different rooms, I had to kind of pick where to go, who I'm closest to. Try to get the interrupt on that mimic, or tell the other person to use a witching if they don't want pox. So, or some boss mechanics on 99 especially, the ball of fire. It's 4 balls, right? If you're solo, you can 100% decide yourself where you want this ball to land, so you can dodge it. But in a group run with people who don't know the mechanics yet, it's very easy to snipe other people with the balls. And if your ether pool is not I think, can it not be maxed? Mine was maxed because I went in solo first at the very start and did like 2 sets. I don't remember if your ether pool cannot be maxed at 99. I think it is. max.
If you're running a match party, I think you will be maxed by 99 unless you pick
Yeah.
a grip out by 91. Because
Yeah.
you can't enter 71 without 94, and you should pick up enough from the bosses. Like
Yeah.
like the 80 and the 90 boss should cap you out before 99.
I just remember that 3 people died on 99 to the fireball because they sniped each other and it overlapped. So that was more stressful in the group one. It was funny and we had a great laugh together. But in a solo run, you know where you stood and all 4 balls just go there and you just walk away. It's just an example. Some mobs actually, if you're in a party, they will target a random person on their aggro list. So if you're fighting the rider, the horse patrol on 81, he won't just knock away the tank 4 times. He can, but sometimes he just goes to a random DPS and then knocks them away. So like that was really funny when one of our DPS got yeeted through a room because he just thought it's only targeting the tank. So he did not position properly, and he didn't hit a trap though. It would have been hilarious if the patrol just knocked him through a lure trap or a fate trap or something. So yeah, some mobs actually just pick a random person from their aggro list and cast a thing on them. Another funny one was the snake patrol. I think it's on 61. So someone stepped on the lure trap and the snake went 2 rooms further away to cast its cast on the party member. So the snake just sprinted to the other room.
Nice.
To cast the AoE on the party member, and we all thought it glitched out and just tried to run away and patrol from there. But it stayed in combat and actually murdered our samurai. So that was great.
In comparison to other DDs, I'd say it wasn't as challenging. It has its own times of difficulty for sure. Even with the generous drops it gives near the end. But for a veteran within the Deep Dungeon community, I can pretty much speak for most that would say that it wasn't as challenging as any of the other Deep Dungeons by any means. I will say, though, that in comparison to other things in the game as a whole, I'd say this content is a bit harder than most. Even not Deep Dungeon content in general, I mean Pilgrim's Traverse, even within a group setting. There are things that Deep Dungeon as a whole just provides, I think, that can make it hard for those that do other bits of content and have little experience with the Deep Dungeon mechanics. But if you're just speaking simply Deep Dungeon and solo, I believe this to be the easiest of the 4 for sure.
I think it was challenging for a Deep Dungeon itself, but we can't. I think Deep Dungeon has a problem with difficulty itself because what is the difficulty we can suffer on Deep Dungeon? I mean, one-shot mechanics or more monsters, wall traps, for example. I don't think they can increase more the difficulty than that kind of stuff. So I believe its difficulty is nice for a solo challenge, but it's not an ultimate raid, for example.
That's fair. And I guess in a way, with say your ultimate experience, could you imagine things from an ultimate anything from an ultimate could translate to a Deep Dungeon, or do you feel that they're way too different, that it really is kind of just 2 different universes in a way?
I think not, because that will lock a lot of jobs to be able to clear solo the Deep Dungeon itself. You can't log healers, for example, to clear it if you add certain mechanics that you need to clear on Ultimate Raid, for example, on the Quantum 14. You can't solo it because there is party mechanics. You can place party mechanics on certain solo jobs on Deep Dungeon. I think they should focus the difficulty on. Can I talk about Finh, another creator?
Yes, sure.
You know him.
Absolutely, yes.
Like Finh challenge, no chest, certain jobs or roles, speed completion, maximum either pull possible, kill everything. They should focus on make us as players modify our rune to get more rewards, challenge log, or even achievements for extra sacks or any kind of reward. I think that will modify the rune and create a way more challenge itself. than simply making every monster one-shot you.
So I guess another way to put it as like an interpretation, like
Yeah.
what Deep Dungeon is currently, it's almost like kind of cranking up all those difficulties as opposed to, say, adding like a new feature in it. And you would find that kind of a good way to make it more challenging than it currently is.
Yeah, I don't think they can add more mechanics itself to make the challenge harder because, yeah, as I said, they will lock away certain jobs. So I really can't imagine what they can add to make a harder Deep Dungeon because I believe the difficulty of Deep Dungeon is already on a top.
I think it was fairly challenging. Like I said, it took me 3 or 4 attempts. The first attempt I died relatively early, like 50 something. So I would say it took me like three attempts. And I think it was fairly challenging in general. But after I cleared this, I decided to give Heaven and High a few tries, and I have gotten to first 70 or 80 Heaven and High 1 or 2 times. Can absolutely tell what people were talking about, that the PT is a lot easier. Mostly that basic attacks just hurt a lot less, and basic attacks in Heaven and High hurt a lot. So I compared to the other dungeons, I think compared to Heaven and High, which is the only one I've seen like beyond floor 30 or something, it's definitely a lot easier. But I think it's compared to like maybe Savage raiding and that kind of thing, which I have more experience with, I would say it's easier than that. I think it's weird to compare them because they're completely different experiences. But if I had to compare them to like the current Savage raid tier, I would say that P7 and P6 are way harder than PT solo.
So would you say, like, if we do like a traditional rating distribution of difficulty, you had like normal, extreme, savage, ultimate, like would you put your experience kind of like in between extreme savage or like early savage or extreme?
Extreme savage it looks fine. It's like I would say it's like extremes in the sense that you can just keep trying and it will work out eventually. Like you don't really need too much preparation. You don't really need like to have a lot of knowledge or coordination, that kind of thing. Just so I would say it's like an extreme where you just go in and eventually it will work out.
PT definitely ranks among the less challenging solo content I've attempted. While it's hard to compare between different content types, maybe even easier than some of the 8-man trials I ran unsynced in my solo journey. I did have the advantage of having done a party clear of PT first, so I already knew what to look out for, but I never felt in danger from anything other than my own lack of attention. Now, that's not to say it was a simple clear. I had maybe 7 or 8 wipes before reaching floor 100 solo. But every one of those wipes came from my own carelessness, generally from pulling too many mobs at once as I tried to rush through the earlier floors. There was no point, perhaps aside from the floor 10 boss, where I had to think ahead and plan my resource usage, as I did in the late floors of Palace or Heaven on High.
In your previous Deep Dungeon clears, did you run in a party first, or did you go through those kind of solo?
No, those were all solo first. Yeah, this time I was invited to a first day clear party and said that sounded like fun, so I went in with that. But the other dungeons were all solo first. Palace, in fact, I was not even aware there was a community until I was well down towards the 160s, 170s, and so everything up to that was pure blind prog for my part.
Amazing. I love hearing that because it's so rare to find someone who actually dives into specifically Palace blind, and just hearing that, and I'm glad you had that experience because I think
I'm glad that I experienced Palace the way I did. So.
Well, I think it's kind of like out of the 4, I would say it is the easiest. If I had gone as not a tank, like if I had gone in as like a DPS, probably I wouldn't have been able to survive as much as I did, making mistakes. But yeah, as far as solo stuff, that is, I think Palace of the Dead is the hardest thing I've ever done solo-wise. But definitely PT is the easiest out of the 4.
I think it was challenging compared to other pieces of content. So just for my personal attempt at getting my first clear, it took me 3 different times to do. So, but the first 2 times I died to like really stupid mistakes. So it was like a learning experience for me. I think in my first time, I died to like a room with a lot of mobs, and I tried to kill everything, but then I just died because I didn't know what I was doing. So I learned not to do that when I'm solo. And then the second time I died was, I think, a luring trap into a explosion chest combination. So that was also a good learning experience not to do that when I'm low on health. So I learned not to open those silver chests then. So I think I learned from my mistakes and was able to get my clear afterwards. But like mechanically, it's not too difficult. So I think after I studied what the mobs did on the higher floors and just didn't do anything stupid, I was able to clear no problem.
What would you say would be like maybe the hardest thing you've done in 14, in your opinion?
The hardest piece of content in 14?
Generally speaking, yeah, just for you.
So for me, like I think I've cleared 3 ultimate raids at this point, so I think ultimate is probably the hardest piece of content in the game. So, but that's kind of like designed to be like a real pain in the ass to clear without like a lot of time investment and knowledge of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I imagine you've done Savages as well, like all the Savages, I imagine?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
Yeah.
Okay,
Not
I mean,
all the Savages, but
okay.
I think...
Okay, it's fair if you didn't. It's not too big of a deal. So then putting in kind of in that perspective of like raids and party content where you have it kind of distinguished between like normal, extreme, savage, ultimate. If you were to kind of put your PT solo experience, where would you kind of put it in that respect? Or do you think it's just way too different that it really can't be categorized in that sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think mechanically it's probably a little bit harder than a dungeon in terms of like for the most part. Some of the bosses are definitely more involved than dungeon bosses, and I think the punishment for just screwing up a mechanic is severe enough to where I would probably say it's like maybe an extreme trial level of difficulty for like the bosses because you have to be perfect throughout the entire thing. But I think just like the mobs in general are pretty straightforward and it doesn't make it much harder than an extreme trial, I think, in terms of like comparing to like normal dungeon, extreme, savage, ultimate level difficulty.
I think it's very hard to compare Deep Dungeon in general and Solo Deep Dungeon to other content in Final Fantasy. The reason being that the difficulty varies a lot depending on the job you play and the RNG you have regarding pomenders and floor effects. As a team, Deep Dungeon isn't too hard in general, while on a solo run you have to kind of spread out your pomenders more well thought. If I had to compare solo PT to any content in Final Fantasy in difficulty-wise, I would probably compare it to an early floor Savage resource-wise. While on the rotation or mechanic-wise, I would put them at a dungeon or extreme level.
Now, you said there was kind of a variance of like, depending on the job that you play and such. At least with your experience with Paladin and Black Mage, would you say that there's a big variance or not that much of a big variance?
There's a big variance on how I approach the different floors and mobs. While one of my favorite mobs as a Paladin was in the 60+ floors that did nothing but align AoE, and when it hit low HP percentages, it only did like 10+ attacks. While that wasn't a big issue on Paladin, it was more on a DD job, and I was kind of forced to spend more steals than I expected and kite a little bit more, so not to die and spend some potions. So I think that varies a lot depending on the job you play, especially compared to tanks being on the easier side in this kind of deep dungeon.
Compared to the other deep dungeons, I think it was very easy. Like kind of split in 2 parts. If we're talking just like the OG clear, the regular clear, to me it felt the same difficulty as Jcorazon. I don't really think it was easier or harder than it. Now, if we include like clears after that, like any clear I did beyond the first one, then I think Pilgrim's Traverse is by far the easiest one out of all the deep dungeons. And I mean, first week I started a fight on Samurai from floor 50, cleared without opening a single chest. Just kind of ridiculous that it's even possible, in my opinion. Like, you could not do something like that in your record, those.
Yeah, if I compare to other solo deep dungeons, I would say pretty bluntly, not really. I might have, at least in Eureka Orthos, I might have found that more challenging at the time, but that might have also been because I was less experienced. But I think the biggest thing was just, I never really had a moment throughout the entire deep dungeon that I was like, feeling tense or stressed or like, I might not have enough to go on. I never really experienced this because, well, I think they removed too much friction from it. Like, no amnesia and no blind, for example. I do think it's the correct decision to remove them because they were very unfun enchantments to play with. But I also, especially Amnesia, also added an important difficulty that you actually have to overcome. It was a good obstacle. And then if you combine this with the fact that it's also low auto attack damage from that was the same as in EO, now all of a sudden you have a situation where Serenity's kind of went from a very important resource in Palace of Dead and Heaven on High to a well, fun suggestion to maybe remove the damage down to Gloom so you can go a little faster. If I had to sum it up, it doesn't feel like there's any point where you have to be tensed or stressed about your current situation, and because of that, it also feels like your decision making in what you do is significantly less relevant. In the sense of what you might choose to do, whether or not you might go for an extra chest or try to sneak by, it's never really as punishing as it could be anywhere else, and so your ultimate choice doesn't really matter much either, as it can't really ever hurt you too much, if I can make myself clear on that.
Would you say, kind of leaping off kind of what you mentioned there, would you say in your opinion it was the kind of the layout and the enemies themselves that made it kind of less tense, or do you think it's a product of like the Pomander loadout that we had that kind of produced that less tenseness? Or another way to put it, if the enemies were significantly harder, do you feel like the Pomanders would then have more significance? Or if the Pomanders were much different, the enemies how we have it right now would make it more tense? Or do you think it's like a mix of both or something like that?
I think even just comparing it to EO, I think it's a mix of both. I feel like our palms here are a bit stronger than what we have in EO, mostly just because of how common and how varied the incenses are in particular, because you just have a lot of different options and they're very common, like quickly become pretty damn common on late sets, especially with how impactful Maze Root and Poison Fruit are. They just both pretty much eliminate a floor entirely. And also in how mobs, I just haven't done EO in a while, but I do feel that mobs are also just less lethal. And I don't just mean that in that there's less like gotcha one-shots that EO did have more of, but also like even though the one-shots start later or very late, depending on if you have Bark plus Steel on or not, their mechanics overall just felt way more intuitive and easier. Like when I was doing it blinds, I just went off on my like in the first blind group run I did on day 1, I went off of my own quite a lot. And we all just kind of ran our own way to see what mobs we could find. And with the vast majority of ones I pulled, it was pretty easy to predict what was going to happen. It's usually just either a Kono or a point blank, and it's just the rare, usually it's only the rare hidden targeted AoE that would maybe hit you. Even something, for example, like the Antlion's 1-2 March, it's like, yeah, it's probably gonna go back, isn't it? So and then in the final set, you also have line of sights, unlike EO, and mobs are still less dangerous than they were in EO, and most mechanics are just not really that impactful there.
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that too with the line of sighting. EO, we couldn't really line of sight. I mean, you could, but I personally wouldn't trust it. And the wall tactic, the line of sighting in PT was obviously strong because, it felt like the last 20 floors have it on high. So I know a lot of gamers were using like wall strat basically as prog. It's like just hide behind a wall. You're probably going to survive most of the mechanics. It didn't even matter what the mechanic was at that point. It was just, you're just going to avoid most of them. Like it would, whether it's in, out, or left, right, it's like, well, if you just hide behind a wall, it negates it all completely.
No, I think there are only 2, or does the Dreamer laser pierce line of sight? Or is it only balls and plants?
All line AoEs would go through walls. So, like, the Lions would do it, the Plants would do it, the Dreamers would do it, so...
Yeah, only those 3 then.
Yeah, right, and if you don't pull them, then, it doesn't become a problem. Or, actually, the Airmon, I guess, would include... Yeah, but basically all liners. But yeah, that was the only thing. You didn't get penalized for, like, all the other AoEs, they wouldn't penalize you in that front, so, for sure. Whereas, like, EO, like you're mentioning, EO, because you didn't have a wall, you had to solve the AoE. So if you just went the wrong way, then you're kind of dead.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Granted, I think EO can also have a case for that it had lethargy, so that could get more punishing. That's another can of worms with how strong lethargy is.
Not really. 7, I before clearing completely solo, I did just practice runs of 71 to 100. And that took maybe a dozen attempts, most of them being from 70 to 80 floors, like just getting used to being solo. But once I actually got confident enough to do solo from start, I did that in a single attempt. And I'm sure I got lucky to some degree. I'm sure I got like a lot more instances than on average, and like I did play on a really strong job. But I did feel like PT is pretty significantly easier than the other deep dungeons and other difficult content in the game, like the Savage Raiding and Ultimates.
Okay. You kind of felt like your clear was pretty streamlined from your experience.
Yeah, I didn't have any real struggles. There were some panic moments of just like being able to throw down a witching. Also, the floor 80, whatever it is, the headless horseman guys kept catching me off guard and having to run into like a patrol of 3 of them, and ends up having you knocked about the like entire floor. It's really annoying.
Did you feel that the Pomanders kind of were a big help to kind of get you out of kind of those rough situations, or did you just feel like overall the challenges provided within PT were like pretty average for you?
I mean, they're pretty average per se. It's just really long, right? That's the thing. Like, there's a long time to never make a mistake, and especially in the later floors, like one mistake can just kill you straight up. And in those instances, having the Pomanders as a help, like, it lets you get out of a lot of positions that you shouldn't have put yourself in the first place.
I've done pretty much all sorts of content in the game, save for clearing an ultimate. That just doesn't particularly interest me right now. I would consider PT solo more challenging than that non-deep dungeon content, in that it's very much just you against the world in deep dungeon in many ways. You largely have no one to blame but yourself, no one to rely on but yourself. Of course, there are great creators out there who help with guides, providing clips or VODs of their runs, or giving tips and advice, but when it comes down to it, it's really just you, your instincts, and your preparation all against the clock, making a lot of split-second decisions at times that can sometimes be make or break for your run. My main solo deep dungeon experiences are with Eureka, Orthos, and PT. It was not as challenging as Eureka Orthos, in my opinion, in that there were some instances where I felt like you could take more hits than you'd be able to in EO. EO felt very much like a LOL, you don't know this mech, die kind of situation. But being able to queue in from later levels was a massive boon, in my opinion, especially considering that I was not able to do so or not being able to do so for EO kind of contributed to my burnout and my then abandonment of that solo attempt. My personal best for EO was 90, but I ran into time hurdles with 61 through 70. I really needed reps of 61 plus. Getting to that point only to fail was extremely hard on me mentally and physically. Actually, my carpal tunnel got so bad during one run that it actually forced me to willingly wipe it because I couldn't finish that floor set without putting, my wrist in danger. I had recently become disabled for different reasons, and I had to give up all of my then dreams. And the thought of another disability crushing like the silly little dream of me, soloing a deep dungeon kind of really broke me emotionally. So in the end, I threw in the towel there for my mental health, because EO became a reminder of limits put on me outside of my control. But I can't even begin to explain how grateful I am for, being able to queue from those later levels.
Sorry to hear about that. Do you play on a keyboard mouse?
Yes, I do play a keyboard mouse.
Have you tried other ways of playing the game?
I have tried. No matter what I can do, control just ain't it for me.
Okay, no, that's fair. I mean, give it a try, right? Is what it is. Because I know there's obviously so many other ways to the game, and I know maybe not to the severity of your carpal tunnel. I know people have chosen different methods of gameplay just because to mitigate that, but I'm sure you've tried many other ways to figure this out. So
yeah, I can definitely try a couple other things. There are other kinds of mouses out there that I've heard of, that I've looked into, but for now I've kind of just branching out and doing different things in the game. It really helped a lot because it changed up, the hand muscles that I was using, so I wasn't just pressing the same buttons over and over for like hours.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm sure having those checkpoints, like you mentioned, where at least allows you to kind of allot your time a lot better, feel like you're having progression to the content as opposed to the other deep dungeons.
I don't think I would say it was challenging in any way, but that's with the thing of like 50 plus Heaven on High clears, 30 plus Palace, etc. I've done Savage raiding, I've done Ultimate raiding. So, like, I think some of the bosses, the first time you see them, can be a little bit harder than what we're used to. But I also think that once you know them, they're a lot more straightforward than they look. Like, the 60 and the 90 boss come to mind as both, like, there's a lot happening visually to pass quickly. But you realize on both of them that, like, 90 has a safe spot in every corner of every quadrant of the room, right? So, like, once you've read if you need to dodge Twin Wing Treachery or, like, the 4 front, whatever it is, the front and back one, like, you know that if you go to a side, there is a safe spot there, and then you're just looking at those 4 tiles, and you never have to look at the rest of the room. And it's the same with 60, where you're looking at all these giant cactuars dancing around, and it's like, well, actually, I only care about the one in the middle tile. Like, and once you start doing that, and you just remove like 90% of the visual clutter on the screen, the fights just become very straightforward again, and it's kind of like what we're used to in deep dungeon bosses. I don't think that the floors are challenging particularly, and I guess, like, coming from like a score running background as well, the fact that we are seeing in like week 1 people walking through, and like, granted, these are people playing, like, they're playing strong jobs, they're playing Black Mage, Picto, whatever, but like, they're walking through full clearing 1 to 100, killing every single mob, hitting luring traps, etc. And all we've got left is basically pushing more and more speedruns out. But like, you look at people doing 7+ speedruns now and still full killing the final sets. So like, there's a challenge there, but it's kind of like one of those make it your own challenges, and it's for like only for that top echelon of like score players, really. I don't think anybody should be struggling for like a first clear if they have any deep dungeon experience in here. But I'm also very aware that, like, when EO came out, right, there was like we don't need a time management guide. Like, how the hell are you running out of time in here? And then like a couple of weeks in, there's people like, hey, I'm doing EO, it's my very first deep dungeon, and I keep struggling on time in the 61 set. And it's like, oh, you know what? There are people that just don't have fundamentals. This is the first time they're doing the content. They don't understand that there's proximity mobs in the key room. You probably need to have killed them before you open the key. Like, because if every single floor you're making this mistake, you're adding 20 kills onto your set for no reason. So like, there's things to challenge people in here. I just don't think it's challenging for us.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, anyone getting into the content for the first time is certainly going to have a decent challenge. I mean, Deep Dungeon in itself, even with the PT iteration, is still very different than other things that we've done that you have in 14. So, I mean, there'll be an adjustment period. And if anything, I guess one could argue that the adjustment period is probably just faster, but there is still going to be an adjustment period. And it comes...
and also, I'm curious, like, if this was Deep Dungeon 3, right? Like, if we hadn't just done years of Eureka, like, I wonder how it would have felt to us coming into it. Because I think a lot of us came into this, saw the formula was like EO based, just with lower health pools, kind of. And I think a lot of us had strategies in our minds immediately, right? Of like, oh, I can probably rely on silver chests from like 51 onwards. I can probably use my palms more liberally because they're not going to be as, I say as valuable, you know what I mean, right? There's not going to be a requirement to have steals later in. There's not going to be a thing of like, I don't have any Serenties left, I'm in trouble now, because it seems to be EO coded. Whereas like, if we came into it straight out of Palace and Heaven on High, like, I wonder if we would have had the confidence to lean into that, or if we would have been like hoarding things a bit hard, more and making it a harder thing for ourselves.
Yeah, probably. There's a lot from the EO experience that carried over into PT that we used, like, statistically speaking. So it certainly helped. I mean, I personally was going into PT assuming the EO formula, and pretty much it was pretty obvious right away to me. Like 51 plus with the higher, with the higher incense drop rates and everything. So I was leaning into that a lot harder. But also, like, even the idea, like you mentioned, like, hoarding the Serenities and figuring out ways around that. Even then, I was still thinking EO reign there, where like, I can kind of ease up a little bit on that and know that I have a lot of ways out of situations. And yeah, that certainly helped me. Yeah, and I didn't really find too much of a problem with the floors. I mean, if anything, for me, it was really just the bosses and just getting caught with, like, certain gotcha mechanics, but that was fine. So yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with you on that, on your thoughts on that.
So I'm going to compare it to other deep dungeons because those are the only things that I've ever done solo. The first clear was challenging. However, the clears after that, they were not challenging at all. Most of the difficulty that I found, it was all in the first run that I did, especially the last boss. Figuring out the exit flares in the last boss took me like 4 hours, and it would have taken longer if we didn't have the checkpoint system, because then I would have been reclimbing like 5-6 hours just to die to it again, just to get some footage that might help me. Yeah, so that was the challenging part, was learning everything, making sure that I remembered it during the run, because again, I had only had my own resources. I didn't have like someone else's VOD to look over for a couple hours. I was just, if I died to a boss, I would stop right there, look at my stream to see what I died to, and then like, all right, gotta drop this down and then start the next run. That way, try to keep everything fresh. But yeah, the first run was the most challenging for it, which was good. I was very glad that the first run was challenging, but sadly, all the other clears I did after that were normal clears, they were not as challenging or as fun.
Would you say that they were, in comparison to, say, the other deep dungeons, would you say it was like the least challenging, or would you say there was like a similarity between the other deep dungeons in terms of, say, clear number 2, clear number 3, etc.?
So, because I did this one blind, I do put it above one of the other deep dungeons that I did, like EO. Because EO, I basically just followed a guide and looked at what the monsters did. So it was basically just learning how to use the pomanders in EO, and then just executing the bosses. Where this one, I pretty much had to, since I had to learn everything myself, there was a bit more information that I needed to gather. But then if I try to compare it to like POTD or Heaven on High, those two were definitely much more challenging, just because of the nature of how they are with their auto attacks, with the debuffs and how you handle them. Since they're just very different deep dungeons, and they present just a different challenge than what PT did.
Yeah. So I do a lot of the group content, the high end content. I'm a Savage Raider, and I've cleared T. I've progged a couple other ones, but haven't gotten clears on those yet. With that one, there's a chance for like collaboration. If you miss a mechanic and you don't understand something, there's somebody there to kind of like catch you and support you. And as a group, you get to clear content together. In solo, it's you and only you. So like if I had like a lack of skill in something, it's not, I couldn't ask for help. And I definitely couldn't blame other people for, a mix-up. Because everything that was happening, it was only me and the game. So, it can be a little bit hard to like, geez, how do I want to put this? It's hard for someone who does a lot of group content to go solo, and you kind of you will slam face first into that deep dungeon wall where it says you're here by yourself and it's all or nothing kind of thing. Right. So like, you can see where your shortcomings come up, and they will absolutely bite you in the butt. But that's the challenge of solo, is to see those and then overcome them later. So yeah, overall, yeah, it's really challenging just because of the solo aspect of it.
Yeah, and kind of what it kind of demands out of you.
Yeah, because like, what was it? There was one poll that went really, really south on me. I was I think it was on floor 85. I was pulling a Humbaba, and I tripped over a luring trap. And I was able to salvage that pull because I had a witching. But then the very next room, the same situation happened again, and I didn't have the witching. And I didn't have any other tools to help me out, so I just ended up blowing a lot more resources than I wanted to, and then the next problem that showed up just killed me. So, a lot of that was due to panic in the situation because I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't have that eventuality in my head at the time. But the next time it happened, it was easier.
Yeah, because you got experience, you got better.
Yeah, and I had a pomander burn strategy for the 91 to 98 floors too. So I already knew where devotions were going, where flights were going, where basically if I had the pomanders for it, I knew exactly what floor they were going to go on. That's how long it took me to get my clear, between just leveling my own skill and then waiting for the game to be playable.
So I thought about this a bit, and I guess the part that I thought about is more about PT within a group. Okay, so in comparison to the other deep dungeons, was it challenging? No. Yeah, the changes that they've made have just made it so fucking easy, and I'm just so disappointed and so irritated about the way that it is. So was it challenging? No. They've removed, starting, the mob HP is non-existent. If you play Samurai, you're not going to be able to do your full opener on any mob on a floor that isn't debuffed for the entire fucking run, because the mob will just die. It's just, even when you play tank, you do your burst on it on a mob, and on any set, the mob is just going to melt and die. It just feels like the HP scaling was terrible. They've removed no abilities debuff. What else did they do? So was PT solo challenging? What was the most challenging thing? The most challenging thing? I don't even know. there's no time management at all if you're playing a DPS job. Well, I think if you're playing any job. Right. So the other part of your question, in comparison to other things I've done in the game. So let's compare it. Let's compare PT to Palace of the Dead. Like Palace of the Dead, the decision making that you have to do in Palace of the Dead once you reach 171, or let's say the hardest part of the run, the 181 set, there is nothing like that at all in PT. So was PT solo challenging in comparison to Palace of the Dead? No, not all. Was PT solo challenging in comparison to Heaven on High? No, not at all. Was PT solo challenging in comparison to EO? No. But I've kind of jokingly said that EO, the balancing is kind of bad, and the devs should be tarred and feathered for what they've done to it. But comparatively, there's nothing that the devs could do to atone for just how terribly balanced PT is. It's just so shit. It's fucking terrible. Oh my god. No more HP. The incense drop rate is too high. I don't know. I think I've jokingly said that a chimpanzee that was blind in one eye and missing 3 fingers could solo PT because that's how easy it is. And I don't say that to be toxic to players or anyone that would ever struggle with the content. On the contrary, I think anybody listening that hears me say that should think, oh my god, it's doable, it's easy, because it is. There's no escaping that. It's just lacking in any kind of difficulty or replayability in terms of, I'm going to go and do this job because it's more difficult. It's just no, pick whatever job you want. You're going to go in and you're going to clear because they've just made it so easy. But the most difficult thing is probably the bosses. And I enjoy the bosses, but I don't play a Deep Dungeon for the boss fights. I do it for the flaws and the challenges and the decision making in between. And overall, PT is lacking in that massively. And it's why, since PT came out, I've just completely gone off the game and I'm not really playing it anymore because this one thing that I was looking forward to just lacked challenge completely. To bring it back to your question about it being challenging. So yeah, but as a little aside, you said that we can compare to other DDs or other content within 14. I think the Duty Finder flaws, the way that they've balanced the content around that as to be completable by people in a match party of 4, I'd say that difficulty is kind of similar to say Stormblood Alliance raid. Back when that was released, where you do have to know the mechanics or you're going to die, but it's not that punishing. Everyone can queue, everyone can do it, and I think for Deep Dungeon, that level of difficulty and the way that it translates into the solo experience is a massive misstep. And yeah, I know it's not what you asked, but I just want to say I'm so disappointed with how it all has been. Yeah.
No, and
That's it.
I appreciate that because that's exactly kind of the kind of opinion and the thought process that I'm looking for, which is one reason I wanted to have you especially. Now, kind of you're kind of touching upon the HP quite a lot. If you kind of had a sweet spot for kind of where the HP was, and if you could look at it between the previous 3 dungeons, which one of those was the sweet spot of HP value for enemies to you, in your opinion?
It's an awkward thing to consider because over the last 3 or 4 years or so, things change. Machinist Palace of the Dead is going to feel completely different now than it did at the start of Shadowbringers, just due to potency creep and countless times that they've buffed drill or buffed heat blast potency or buffed 1-2-3 potency. So when we talk about HP value and stuff, it's hard, man. But I like Heaven on High HP and how it's kind of, I don't know, I'm honestly not sure because the way that they design jobs, and there was something someone said to me. All right, so my FC leader, he sent me a message about PT after I'd completed it, and he was just yeah, I don't think the devs know how to like tune content anymore. And I don't do Ultimate, but I've seen people express that kind of opinion with how Picto was released around when Fru came out. How could they release it the way that it is and then go back and nerf the job and then unnerf it? Like, why does it take them a million years to get these things kind of right? I think what I'm ultimately trying to say, I'm trying to word it in a way that's talking about the dev's intentions and this and that and blah blah blah. But I think just ultimately I don't enjoy the way that they design jobs and how that translates into how jobs play in content.
If I were to maybe interject just to maybe help you out a little bit, because I'm kind of seeing kind of what you're trying to say, but I remember did you do the Boja duels before? Have you tried those?
Yeah, I tried them, and I think I did like 2 or 3 of them.
Like, I always thought that was interesting content in my opinion, because the way I enjoyed them personally was to run through almost till you hit like enrage. You saw everything, right? And like you could position yourself to do, I mean, people call it a cheese trap, but they speed run it essentially, because essentially you do it, you kill it in like 45 seconds, you don't deal with any mechanics whatsoever. And kind of I think the point that you're trying to make is that they have content that's out there. And actually I was thinking about this with PT2, where you have mechanics that show up, but we're killing it so fast that it's like none of the mechanics show up because we're just killing it that fast. And it's almost like, at least personally, it's almost like you kind of want to enjoy what these mechanics are, but I know in a match party, it's like you're seeing maybe one mechanic, but everything's just dying before you even reach it. So it's like, it's whatever. As long as you kill it fast enough, it's there. And that is due to kind of how the jobs are. You just burst everything down. And even in solo, even Samurai, as you were using that as an example, and I had taken that in myself, I mean, you could full burst an enemy before it really finishes its like first mechanic. So it has all these things that are there, and maybe they are challenging, maybe they are pretty cool, but I mean, you're just bypassing because you're killing it so fast. And that's where I think the balance gets weird, because if you're trying to balance it where that challenge happens because you see these mechanics, but then you're killing it and it doesn't do anything, then I mean, where's the challenge, right? Challenge is hitting your buttons correctly, not managing the enemy.
Yeah, definitely. And that's another thing that I've kind of found towards the end of PT, like where the incense drop rate is so high, like you're just using maze root, you're using poison fruit, you're using bark balm and the HP increase, which lets you choose mechanics on bosses. I think DPS would still die on the floors if you ate mechanics, but they've designed it in such a way that you just pick up a load of shit that helps you not interact with the mechanics or the content in a fun, meaningful way. The final boss, or the floor 100 boss, as an example, like you've got a double target fight, and you change between the light and the dark, and manage their health. You bypass that entirely by using Bark Balm, which dots them both and does insane damage. So you've given us a multi-target fight, yet you've given us a way to just completely bypass it entirely. Like, so what's the fucking point of giving us a multi-target fight? It just, I don't know. It just seems like they're afraid to make anything difficult. But it was never going to be difficult when 4 people in a match party can queue up to floor 100. I knew that we weren't going to get another PT or another POTD or another Heaven on High. But I was just so shocked at how far they went. The silvers, none of the silvers after 81 give Ether Pool upgrades, so you're guaranteed to either get an exploding chest, which will speed up the floor, or an incense. And you've seen like so many people just talk about like, oh, I didn't fight a single mob in the final set because I just kept picking up incenses, or I just kept getting mud ball. And then you go into the final fight and you use a Bark Balm. It gives you the crazy HP boost, and with that, there's only, 2 mechanics that you really have to pay attention to? Like the 4 baited fireballs on top of your character, or the circle gel that goes around you. You just have to make sure you don't get hit by the spike that comes up because it can yeet you off the arena. You can just stand there and ignore it on Machinist. And you take a Vuln up, cool. And all the other mechanics you can just kind of ignore because you've got the buffer of the HP value. And it's just like, why design a solo challenge and then just give us all of these things to bypass the challenge and like make the drop rate so high? Where is like the inherent difficulty or like the inherent fun in the challenge? Like, why do we have to make it more difficult on ourselves by saying, oh, I'm going to do a challenge run where I just don't pick up incense to see if I can clear it? And like, yeah, people obviously can clear it. Like, I think it was day 2 that somebody did, one of the Japanese runners, they did a run where they started from floor 71 on Samurai, and they just didn't pick up any chest or any incense, and they managed to clear to floor 100. And that just shows how undertuned and how easy it is. There's no avoiding or arguing with that, and I think that's just where my disappointment lies.
Actually, I think you might agree with me with this one, because you kind of just said it too, but that term you used, inherent challenge, for one, I think that's kind of sometimes the most important part of any game. Like, forget 14, like every single game's out there, that originally it's designed to be this kind of difficulty that is fine. And yeah, you will have a community that will form over content. I think any game will have that. But the community can do challenge runs, they can do the class runs, they can do this and that, speed, whatever. But I mean, I think that inherent challenge needs to also be there at its base, because
definitely,
how much can the community pull from that it's almost like I don't want to say that that's what they're doing, but it's almost like now you're relying on the community to create these challenges. But in essence, I mean, if you're not attaching like an achievement to it, or you're not attaching to reward to doing those specific challenges, you're just doing it for fun, but it still has to be fun at its base.
Yeah, the thing is, like, all of these challenge runs, like, what can we do realistically to make it more difficult? Like, not pick up chests, either. Like, give ourselves like a forced no abilities debuff where you remove all of your abilities and then only use your GCDs for the dungeon. But it's just like, why should we have to do this to make it difficult? And like, the difficulty or the challenge of Deep Dungeon is what keeps players like me and you coming back. It's because everyone everyone feels different, and that there's a different way to play every time. But in PT, it's just like, I'm just going to use whatever I want and not care, and just kill every mob and win. But I don't think any experienced runner could ever go into PT and like sweat and think, oh my god, this run isn't going to clear, unless like they make a like grave mistake. But we're not sweating on floor 93 thinking, god, I've spent 40 minutes nearly, how am I gonna pull this out the bag? It's just like, nope, I'm gonna spend my stuff and I'm gonna pick it all back up and I'm gonna win because the incense drop rate is so high, or because the mobs just die within 10 seconds or like 15 seconds.
Just for the sake of argument, and before we move on to the next question, if PT is exactly how it is, right, no change, no nothing, but you had like a literal achievement or reward saying, hey, clear PT without opening gold chests, like, would you actually like that, or would that not matter to you at all?
I don't know. It would be cool for them, but then again, it'd just be, if that was included, I would see it as a bit of a kick in the teeth. Like, ha, look, we know that this is possible because it's so easy, so we included this achievement. So I don't know. I probably wouldn't like it if that was included. But in terms of achievements and stuff for Deep Dungeon, they're lacking. I'm not sure if we'll discuss this at another point, but yeah, like, what achievements do we get to farm for in Deep Dungeon? Like 30,000 fucking accursed hordes. Where's a title for clearing 100 times? Or where's a title or an achievement for clearing on every single individual job? Yeah, I think when it comes to Deep Dungeon, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to please those of us that do this content regularly. And I think as a result of it, like, a lot of us that have enjoyed Deep Dungeon over the last few years are just going to kind of fizzle out a little bit because there isn't any longevity in doing PT solo for us. I've seen like multiple people just not playing the game anymore. There's less people streaming Deep Dungeon. My sub runs out in 6 days, and I'm gonna let it run out. Like, after PT dropped, I relinquished my house because I was just like, I'm not going to be tied to this game anymore. Like, I've been playing or staying subbed to do Deep Dungeon for like the last 2 years, and this, what I've been looking forward to, has just been a complete and utter disappointment. It's just shit. Like, there's no beating around the bush. It's easy. It's dull. It's a calamity.
Do you consider soloing a Deep Dungeon a casual, hardcore, or an in-between aspect of Final Fantasy XIV?
I think that before Pilgrim's Traverse, I would have considered soloing a strictly hardcore aspect of the game. Palace and Heaven on High are of course notorious for their late floor difficulty, and EO is poorly balanced for solo play to begin with, so I imagine it puts a lot of people off for that reason. But what I've found interesting about PT is that it kind of showcases the possibility for Deep Dungeon soloing to not be hardcore. And I'd very much enjoy a future where instead of a solo clear being the final goal, it's more of an intermediate one. Cleared solo? Great. Now can you do it with these restrictions or at this higher difficulty level? That sort of thing.
So like you would almost put the 4 deep dungeons almost in their own different category, if you will.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
I'd say it really depends on what your definition of hardcore is. So that's a really plain answer, and I'm gonna explain. Give me a minute. If we're talking like from a time investment standpoint, like with the idea of proccing to clear each deep dungeon, then yes, I'd say it is hardcore. There's a lot of time investment that goes into it, especially with things like Palace of the Dead. It's a lot of time investment. You have to go through an entire journey of going through a whole bunch of floors, and then if you die, you got to do it all again. So yeah, I'd say that if you're looking at that standpoint, then definitely, even with the ones that are only 100 floors, only, right? We look at 100 floors as like not that daunting of a task, but like we're also talking about people that play this on a regular basis, that spend a lot of time doing this content. 100 floors actually is a long time. So, but once the clears happened, like for us in the community who stick around and continue to play it, I'd say it's somewhere in between. Like I would say it's somewhere between casual and hardcore. Like I said, for those that get the clear and then stick around and continue to play it, like yourself or myself or other people within the community. But I think it's just a matter of perspective. For me, it's hardcore. Like there's nothing like this in the game, and it really makes me have to focus a lot on what I'm doing in order to be successful and to do it for a prolonged period of time, like by myself. Yeah, it's hardcore. Like there is a lot of things that I wish I could do better, and I can't because it's tough. And maybe that has something to do with me streaming it. I don't know. But I do know for a fact that I don't have this kind of trouble doing other things, other content. I was in Savage doing completely fine on stream, like to use that as a comparison. And people think Savage is hardcore. So like I said, it's all about perspective.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to ask you that. I don't think you have too much Ultimate experience, right?
No, I've never done an Ultimate before.
Okay, so in respect to that, if we were to kind of categorize your typical kind of raid differentiation categories of like normal, extreme, actually you had one gamer also put Unreal in there, so I guess it's like normal, Unreal, extreme, and just in your case Savage, which would be the highest tier. Where would you kind of put the deep dungeons in your opinion, using that kind of category?
I say it's above Savage. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'd say it's above Savage, honestly, because with Savage, I honestly, I'd say it rivals Ultimate, and the only reason why I say it rivals Ultimate, and even though I don't have any experience with it, is because regardless of whether or not the experience is a tougher experience than Savage is concerned, at the end of the day, like if you wipe, you get to go right back in and take 10 minutes at the very most, or at least depending on how you want to look at it, to get back to wherever your prog point is. But that's not us. Like in Deep Dungeon, yeah, that's not how that works. Like if you wipe, you got to go through all those floors again. And I think that amount of time that you have to go back kind of plays into the psyche of it, the psychology of it. Like if you're just able to go into a Savage or into an Ultimate and just go right back to where you were 10 minutes later, you're more willing to do it because it's only 10 minutes. All right, yeah, this sucks and I don't like dying, but it's only 10 minutes, not that big of a deal. But I mean, imagine going now for those people to come over to Deep Dungeon, imagine going through 190 floors and then getting face planted by Godfather. That's going to be a little more daunting than anything that you probably ever dealt with if you've never done a Deep Dungeon before, because now you have to deal with that kind of time investment to get back to where you were just to prog and try again. And I think that's really daunting to a lot of people. And I think that's one of the reasons why POTD is viewed as one of the hardest ones, if not the hardest one to complete. But for me personally, as far as the thing you just said was the normal and the Unreal and the extreme and the Savage, it's definitely above Savage for me. Like I said, with Savage, it was like if we messed it up, we just went right back to it. We tried again, and it did kind of suck, but like it took 4 or 5 minutes to get back to where we were and try it again. So. Plus, you have 7 other people there to help you out if you wind up messing up. So if you had a problem and you had a question, you could ask, and then you just go right back to it, and you just figure out what you need to do in order to get past that prog point. It's not like that in Deep Dungeon. That's the biggest check for you to basically look at yourself in a mirror and say, you're the problem, so get better. because there's really no other way to justify why you lost. Like, you can blame the RNG or you can blame the mechanics, but at the end of the day, you're by yourself. And I think that has a lot of effect psychologically on a lot of people too, and why probably some people don't do it. So that's a different topic though.
So it's kind of safe to say, kind of in your definition, kind of differentiates something being more hardcore or less hardcore, even into casual, is kind of that time that you put into the content to accomplish the goal.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing for me is, or I think the biggest thing for anybody is that time commitment. It's not about word of mouth. It's not about whatever the content specifically is. Like, now that people could be like, well, then I guess the hoarder achievement, or I guess now the curse Kirie or whatever that the 30K one is, I guess that's hardcore, huh? Well, I mean, technically, if you really want to get into it, how much time are they spending to do that? It takes a lot of endurance and time to get through that. And so I don't know. I'm not saying that is, but what I'm getting at is that when you take something that's very difficult and then you add a harder prog to it, then I think that's what makes it hardcore for me.
Yeah, no, and that's fair. And like, definitely something that I've seen from all the other people up to this point is that what's important is that it's kind of your definition that indicates what to use casual, hardcore, in between. Because in reality, we can define things on paper, on criteria, but really it does come down to the player of what they figure out. Like, I had one person who had like severe carpal tunnel, and I joke with them. I'm like, they were kind of doing their own definition of like, oh, but I it might be weird that I think that this is what is hardcore, and I'm like, no, that this is your own subjective thought. And I told them, like, look, man, if I gave you a challenge that required you to use your carpal tunnel hand and do 900 button presses per minute, like, it's going to be the hardest thing you ever do, because you literally can't do it because your arm is going to like dissolve into nothing, right? So like, for them, that's hardcore for them. For other people, maybe that's easy for them. So that individual definition to me has always been fascinating, because it really is different per person.
Sure. And I think that's why I say that, and I guess we'll get into this as well, but I guess that's why I say that there are a lot of things that people will say as like an opinionated fact. Like, they'll say it like with such, volition. They'll say it with such like, they say it as if it's a fact, when it actually it's not as objective as they're making it sound, is what I'm trying to get at. And like, you could say that, I don't even know, but like, Savage is hardcore, right? You could say Savage is hardcore and it was tough, right? But like, that might just not even have a grade to someone that is just a casual player, because they're not even looking at Savage content as something that they could even do. So like, now extreme is their hardcore. Like you were just saying, it's totally subjective to the person who's actually doing it. But I do understand the whole grading process for overall, as far as like gaming is concerned. There's going to be certain things that are going to be what people would consider hardcore, but most of the time that's just labels that are just kind of like put down by the community as a whole as like, this is what it is. That's why there's now a mid-core and stuff like that, and rating and such, like, just because there's like casual, and then there are softcore and hardcore, right? But like, there's got to be some in between, right? Okay, mid-core, right? And it's just a label that somebody puts on it because they want to make sure that there's something you can identify with, and then be able to find other people that identify with the same thing. So I guess it's kind of hard to be able to label something when it's already labeled, and I think that part's tough.
If I take it as solo content, I think is a hardcore content. Yeah, it is obvious that the dungeon is way easier as a light party, and the existence of solo achievement is the proof that they wanted to make like savage content to solo players.
All right, that's fair. So like, I guess in a sense, as you mentioned, as Savage, I guess in kind of like the rating tier of like normal, extreme, Savage, ultimate, you would consider like a solo deep dungeon kind of like a Savage level?
Yeah, I take it like savage. I mean, light party deep dungeon is like the normal version, and solo in it's like the savage way. Yeah.
So I think like what makes something hardcore is generally time commitment, the level of skill expression, or how difficult something is. So those three things, like time commitment, skill expression, like does playing well? Can you demonstrate that? In this case, you demonstrate it on the scoreboards, and is the content difficult? So on the first 2 points, I think it's clearly, obviously yes, which I think puts it closer to hardcore. But like the difficulty, I think it's sufficiently difficult so that this is closer to hardcore than casual. I mean, it's obviously in between, but like I think the number of hours it takes to do it, and not just to do one clear, right? But like if you're going in blind, if you're learning how to do it, it probably takes. I didn't track how many hours I did because I just did. I didn't track how many hours I did, but like I think that like the time it takes certainly makes this hardcore content, especially if you're going in blind without looking at guides, and if you're trying to get in the scoreboard. I think that that's a very good way of doing skill expression, especially because it breaks it down by job or I guess class. And is it difficult? It could be more difficult, but I think it's sufficiently difficult. This is close to hardcore content. It's not it's not ultimate. It's not even like a fourth floor savage, but it's still I think it's hardcore content. Yeah, I agree. I think it is.
I think that heavily depends on the deep dungeon and what your personal goal is. For EL and PT, I think it's very, in quotations, easy to just do a casual solo run because you can just study the mobs, the bosses, and most of the time, if you do the mechanics, you're just fine. You can't be overwhelmed by a crit. There's nothing that can really just mess with you so much that you just lose the run immediately, unless it's like a moment like you're running from or you have a mob on you and you're like trying to kite it to the next room, but then you step in a lure trap, and then you do want to check the other chest because it's a treasure room, and then you aggro like 3 more things. Like it can get out of hand like that. Of course, it can snowball pretty easily, but if you play it safely, I think you can just very easily do a casual run of PT and EO. On the other hand, having a hardcore run for PT and EO is also possible if you're scoring or if you're putting limitations on yourself, like those challenge runs that a lot of people in the community have been doing with like no gold chests or no silvers. I think Finh did a no gold chest run or no chest run in general on Samurai, I think. And that did look challenging during certain points, especially during like no item floors, because the mobs actually did end up doing a lot of damage, especially during no items and gloom. So I would consider something like that hardcore for these 2 deep dungeons specifically. Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High. For Palace, I don't think you can just do a casual solo run because Palace has so much power over you in terms of spamming no items, spamming gloom no abilities. It's depending on your job that you're picking, it's like really hard, or it can be really hard to get by that. Everything can be fine in the one moment, and in the next moment you lost your run. That's what can happen in Palace. The same thing can be happening in Heaven on High, in my opinion, because the mobs there just do so much damage, especially if they crit you once or twice. But Heaven on High can also be very nice and gentle to you and just give you lots of wipes in especially the last 2 sets, and make it a lot easier for you, because I don't think clicking a Magicite and just going to the exit is necessarily difficult. I think anybody can do that. But it can also be the opposite, where it just gives you nothing, or just things you already have or don't need in that moment, and then the run becomes extremely difficult. Overall, I think if you do play safely, you can still have a really high clear rate for like Palace and for Heaven on High, but the game can just, or Palace and Heaven on High can just decide your run ends here, and there's nothing you can really do against that. Or sometimes it feels like it. Maybe there was something and you just didn't catch it. But then, if that's the case, then that's on you, right? That's not the game's fault. But I think that's what makes those 2 deep dungeons especially fun to me, because there is a bigger variety of negative things that can happen to you. You don't just go in and you're like, okay, this is just a victory lap. I mean, it can happen, of course, but you can still mess up. If you're in 91 and Heaven on High, maybe you do have 3 Magicites left and you do have 3 floors left, but you turn around the corner for some reason and there's a patrol that runs into you and you don't have a raising. It can still like crit you and you die, right? Like stuff like maybe you hit a trap on accident, zoned out, something bad happened, and the run is just over because things do so much damage. Whereas in EO and PT, even if you do run into a mob, there's usually like a 2 or 3 second wait time until the mob starts casting. I'm talking in general, there's probably exceptions, but on average it feels like that. Usually you get like 2 GCDs in yourself before the mob starts casting and you have to position yourself for the cast. That's what it just felt like to me in EO and PT. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just how I'm remembering it. But there's less chance of you turning around a corner and just immediately blowing up from a mob. Unless it's like the lion in the room pre-casting its thing, or like a fitter in EO. These like out of combat one-shot mechanics. In EO, it's more visible, of course, because the layout is more open, so you can usually see it. In PT, you have these narrow corners where you can just like go behind the wall and peek into the room, count the lions, or look if there are lions. If you're not doing that and you die to it, then that's your fault. There's nothing that can defend you in that regard. So, but it's fine. It's happened to everyone. Yeah, in general, I think you can make a run casual, but you can also make it very hardcore in all deep dungeons.
So to kind of like narrow the criteria down just a little bit, and I know you have a lot of raid experience as well on your end. If we were to categorize it in raid terms, so you have your normal, extreme, savage, and ultimate, and if we put the category to like obtaining the title, right? So like I would imagine like when you look at say a savage and ultimate, I mean you're looking at that challenge as basically getting to a duty complete. I mean, obviously there are other challenges that could exist with an ultimate. We've seen like all tank runs, you know, so on and so forth. But just kind of comparing it to just getting the title or just getting the duty complete, where would you kind of put the deep dungeons in that kind of categorization, in your opinion?
Halos would be an ultimate for me, easily. Not only does it have 200 floors, which is the first like 130 floors, are also like this mental tax kind of like. Some people find it really boring because early on mobs don't really do anything. You can still die to stupid things if you zone out, like if you step on a landmine and then open a silver chest and it explodes. That's happened to everyone. But especially towards the end, it's like the similar nerve-wracking feeling of, let's say, Godfather crits you twice and you're like, oh god, like this is for 190. I really don't want to lose the run. I spend so much time getting here. I just want to kill the boss. Like, I know I can do it. I just want to kill the boss. And that is a similar feeling for me if you get to the last phase in an ultimate. And you see that one cast where you're maybe still a bit shaky on the mechanic. And you're like, I need to focus now. I need to get this. I need to play this right. So that is kind of a similar feeling to me. For Heaven on High, I would probably put like a bit below Savage, where again the run can be very gentle. It can also be very mean to you. But if we just take the average run where you don't get spammed wipes, but you also don't only pick up, in quotations, bad stuff. Like let's say not every chest you pick up is an intuition and then it's not usable in that moment. So sometimes you get a wipe, but other times maybe you get a strength or witching or maybe just a frailty or a conceal. So it's more spread out. I still think depending on your job, it can be challenging and also nerve-wracking. So I would put it just a tiny bit below Savage difficulty. But it also really depends on your job.
So would you say that's like in between extreme savage, or would you say like a low tier savage in that definition?
Just a low tier savage, because EO to me is more like extreme trial. Because EO, again, it just feels like learn the mechanics and then you can do it. And that's basically what an extreme trial wants you to do too, right? Remember the mechanics, do it, the DPS check isn't too bad. And then you'll usually get through if you respect the mechanics enough and just do what the game wants you to do. And that's kind of what EO feels like, especially with, again, the mobs having untelegraphed casts. I mean, some mobs in Heaven on High also have untelegraphed casts, right? The Minotaurs, for example. So, like, EO was not the very first dungeon who introduced mobs without a telegraph at all. That has been in the other deep dungeons as well. In EO, it's just the majority of mobs, right? But in EO, you have lethargy to counter that if you forgot what a mob does, which then increases the length of the cast, or the time it takes the mob to cast, which then makes so the telegraph still shows during the time it would actually show when it goes off. So then you can see the telegraph and get a reminder. So there's the safety net, which I prefer that over just wiping stuff in Heaven on High, because then you learn nothing. The mob just falls over and dies, and you don't really see what it's doing. For lethargy, of course, lethargy isn't a wipe, but it helps you learn, even on the higher sets. It helps you go to further, maybe get a new proc point in. But yeah, overall, I think EO is more an extreme trial. I think that's fair. It does have a lot of people find boss 90 like not harder, but it's just faster, right? The mechanics go off like quicker, so sometimes it catches people off guard. It caught me off guard the first time I did it. I knew it was faster because I had seen it on streams, but when you play it yourself, it feels different compared to just seeing it. So yes, it did catch me off guard, and I was like, oh, okay, that's faster than I thought it would be. But when you get used to it, it's fine. And again, that just reminds me of an extreme trial where maybe you get a new proc point. You know what the mechanic does, but you still die to it because it just went off faster than you thought it would. And then after that, it's oh, now I know. And then you do it correctly the next time. That's why I'm comparing EO more to an extreme trial. For PT, it's difficult. I don't want to put it at like a normal rate tier. That feels too low.
It's like Sastasha normal.
Yes, Sastasha normal. Don't forget to click on the switch to know which color it is. No, I think putting PT at like normal rate tier difficulty would be unfair. You do have the bosses, which require you to do the mechanics or you die. Most of the mobs, yes, you can LOS it, so that's the floors are easier. I think the bosses are more engaging. Maybe Unreal, which is to me it's easier than an extreme trial because it is an old extreme trial elevated to the current level, right? Maybe Unreal does make sense because if you're playing Unreal, it's an old extreme, so chances are you did the extreme when it was current content and you still remember the mechanics, so it feels similar, right? And that is kind of what I have with PT, where it does feel similar to EO in terms of the mobs do cast that one-shot you. But it's a bit easier because you have your current level toolkit. So maybe Unreal is where I would put PT.
And you would categorize Unreal, below an extreme? In your opinion?
Below an extreme, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
In my opinion, Unreals are not as hard as extremes. Or maybe I would put EO as like a current extreme that just recently came out, and then PT as an Unreal, which is basically an older extreme that is elevated to the current level, but people usually know the mechanics already. So in terms of difficulty, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's tough to say because what everyone considers hardcore is so insanely varied, right? For MMOs, I think hardcore is just about time investment and learning Deep Dungeon properly with all the depth it can potentially have. It's definitely hardcore content. That's talking soloing as an umbrella term though. So soloing, scoring, challenge runs, everything. If it's just about an initial solo clear, I think even Palace can be pretty comfortably procced by a casual player, depending on how they decide to tackle it and how much thought they put into it. At its core though, soloing Deep Dungeon, even if PT is an easy or at least accessible one, does require mob knowledge, it requires a lot of enthusiasm for the content, and from there it has an insane depth for optimization. And all that seems way more hardcore to me, at least, than learning even something like an ultimate fight, which is mostly repetition until you had consistency per each mechanic.
So would it be safe to say, because you mentioned earlier, that the time investment is a huge factor for you determining something being casual and something being hardcore?
I think the determining factor is for sure time investment, but it's not necessarily... Time investment doesn't equal time spent in the content, right? It doesn't mean that it's hardcore just because it requires, let's say, 500, 600, 1,000 hours to beat. It's more of... You look at an ultimate and you have a mechanic, and you typically have your NA strategy and you have your light PF. This ultimate is the EU go-to, right? But it's just learning that and executing on your own, and that typically I think an average player can do within just a couple of pulls, and then it's just about consistency. With Deep Dungeons, if you look at, for example, Palace, you have really in-depth knowledge that is required for a single job. Like I mentioned earlier to you with my summoner dev to just like raw damage. Now I know that summoner dies to the sprites if I don't have any buffs up, and I know, for example, out of the top of my head that the Gobu from 191 will kill me on Ninja as well, depending on if they high roll or not. And having that knowledge just by virtue of you playing that content and being not necessarily required, but you just take that in as you go, I think that makes it hardcore because it just shows that the content itself has so much more depth that no matter how you approach it, it's going to lead to a little bit of a hardcore play style just because you get so invested into that kind of content. Or at least if you get invested, but it offers the possibility for you to get that invested in it.
And kind of following up in the previous question that you had, and just to kind of, I guess, just re-answer it, if you will, for this question. If you were to categorize kind of, let's say PT specifically, in the designations you have for rating, where you have like normal, extreme, savage, ultimate, where would you put PT in kind of that categorization?
Probably around savage. It's probably, well, it's more fitting, I think, for Criterion. I feel like Criterion and it's difficult to tier, right? I don't think it's on ultimate level. It might be on the level of previous ultimates. Yukop, for example, is like way more mechanically forgiving than Dragonsong Reprise. And if I put it to Dragonsong Reprise, which my group is currently in the middle of P6, I think it's easier than that. It's somewhere in between those. Maybe a late savage tier would be the most fitting categorization that I would think.
And you would put, like, you wouldn't lump the 4 deep dungeons in its own, like, in one category. Like, you kind of would spread them out into multiple categories. Like, POTD and Heaven on High would be kind of step up or multiple steps up, whereas the other ones maybe a couple steps down, if you will.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I think POTD is by far the hardest content that I've ever done in an MMO. I've played a lot of MMOs. I've done hardcore raiding in all the way back in WoW as well. But Palace is the only place where you, at least this is how I feel like, right? Where you have to really get familiar with the kit that you have, and every kit does something unique in Palace. That's just how the place is balanced, right? Paladin, I haven't cleared yet on Paladin. The closest I got was 197, and just the fact that I go into 171 and I have to prog multiple times to just like find a route to both make the time to 180, then beat 180, and then still have the resources to even just like crawl through the later floors, that just doesn't compare to Ultimates at all. Ultimates is mechanical consistency, but Palace, and to a lesser extent Heaven on High, is job knowledge, it's execution, it's staying focused around like 50 minutes. It's insane, but that makes the place fun, right?
I would consider it more as mid-core. I would say it's not really hardcore, because I feel like everyone can do it. It's like literally everyone can do it. It's just the matter of time you want to spend and how you manage your time in the deep dungeon. Especially like, I think tank healer and stuff, is a bit, a lot of time commitment and studying and stuff, like what the ads do and learning process. I would say, yeah, maybe still more casual, maybe. Actually, like casual mid-core, not like mid-core, like casual mid-core, I would say. That's my verdict about that.
So would you kind of say it's the kind of based on like the challenge the content presents to you that kind of would determine it for you personally? Or like another kind of category, would you kind of define it as something as casual or something as hardcore?
I think like in general, Deep Dungeon, they have way less mechanics. Like, it's more an endurance than mechanic learning and studying. There is some studying, of course, like boss 60, I think, was a bit for me hard to learn, for example.
Me too.
But in PT, and whereas I compare again at Ultimates. Ultimates, there's like a lot of mechanics like combined, and it happens like all at once, basically. And especially with multiple people, Whereas Deep Dungeon, you are solo, so it's, yes, that's on you, everything, like all your mistakes are on you then, basically. So that's why I don't categorize as casual, not only casual, more like mid-casual. But because there's like barely mechanics and only like, this ad does only a point AoE, and then I guess it enrages when it's a lower percentage. That's it. Like, there's not much, basically. There's not much, how do I say it, like AoEs that you have to remember, or like point details. I think, yeah, that's how I would say it, honestly, like casual, hard in a way.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the Ultimates requiring you to like execute it more, even on the run back, like even having to, even when you know everything, you still have to do a lot of execution. Whereas you feel like with PT, at least, once you kind of know things, the execution is like not as
non-existent, I would say.
Non-existent. Okay, that's fair too. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sometimes non-existing, because there was like the one ad. I think there was like looks like a tree, not really a tree, and it does a frontal cleave, and then after the frontal cleave, it does 3 more frontal cleaves.
Yeah.
When you do it for the first time, you're like, what? But then second time you see, it's just stay behind. Literally. That's the thing. Whereas ultimates, you still have to do the execution. Some of the executions are really hard to do, and it's also reaction based. Like you have way less time to react, and that's why I say it's more hardcore. It's also like reaction, like execution. What you said.
I feel like it's both. So I'd place it in the in between in the sense that like you can do it whenever, and you don't have to worry about other people. And in that sense, it's of course like very casual friendly. Like you can just completely make your own schedule, and you don't have to worry about anyone else. But it does require quite a bit of time investment as well. So in just as a commitment, it's leaning toward the hardcore. So it's a bit of both.
Interesting. So, like, I guess and this is no judgment at all, right? The kind of the accessibility aspect to you kind of actually tilts it a little bit into the casual category in kind of your definition. Like, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, that's interesting.
And I think, and I mean, it depends on the deep dungeon as well, I think. Like, PT leans more casual, while I would place Palace more hardcore.
So, just another follow-up question: that if because they are thinking about doing checkpoints in the older deep dungeons, like, would you
Yeah.
say that putting in those checkpoints in the older ones would now tilt? If you think Palace is currently like more hardcore, would you say that it would be less hardcore because of those checkpoints, or would you say it still kind of stays in that direction?
It would, I think it would like lower it a bit or tilt it more toward the casual or casual friendly side, because it would just like it would lessen the required time investment a lot, and I feel like that's a big thing that I factor in if I look at like whether something's casual or hardcore.
For me personally, I think it's an in between because you don't have a time commitment to do a solo journey, like whether it's PT, EO. I think people can grind it hardcore casually. I think for me, that hardcore for deep dungeons would be for all the score runners out there that are just sweating it, like playing the RNG hand just to get the top scores, like even on multiple jobs. I think that's more the hardcore.
Okay, so it's like almost like how you like the content on the surface is like an in between casual hardcore, but how you approach it could shift it into a more hardcore situation. Kind of how you put it, right? Now, would you consider the 4 deep dungeons like in different categories? Like, would you say one is more hardcore than the other, or would you kind of lump them all together in like the same kind of viewpoint?
I would have to put them in different categories. I feel like Palace and Heaven on High would probably be the more hardcore, in my opinion. I feel like PT would be your casual, and EO, I feel like it's in the middle just because of how it's designed. And I think hardcore for Palace and Heaven on High, just because you have to think a lot more. So you're forced to play a little bit harder in those deep dungeons.
So I guess another way to put it is like for you, because you're mentioning like, not so much of a time commitment, I guess because of the instance rounds and everything. So kind of for you, a hardcore definition isn't so much how much time you put into it, but more how much execution is required. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
In between, maybe? It is definitely not casual, but like in terms of this word hardcore, I'm not really like 100% sure what that would mean. But I think about it though, and the amount of like hours and time I've spent like soloing Deep Dungeon or watching other people play, I guess that could be described as hardcore. But I think for the average player nowadays, with the amount of guides and like content there is to like help you get your first clear, and the way that certain jobs, warrior and machinist, the way that they've either been buffed or their job adjustments have made them easier to play. I don't know if getting your first clear on machinist or warrior, I'd consider it hardcore, but if you're going to push for an Astro clear in Palace or Heaven on High, that's definitely hardcore. So it depends. It depends on your job choice, like the amount of effort that you're willing to put in. But if you're going to go for a blind clear, then that's definitely hardcore. But yeah, I'm going to give the wishy-washy answer of it depends.
So kind of in your opinion, it's kind of a mix of the time investment and the execution that kind of determines something a little more hardcore than something else?
Yeah, I think so.
I think this is dependent on the deep dungeon that we're talking about. Just from
my limited experience of soloing, some of them are definitely harder than others. But when I put it into the context of other content in the game, sort of like Ultimate, Savages, Extremes, etc., I think I would put them in a hardcore space with mid-core mechanics. By that, I mean, I don't think the mechanics of any one mob or boss of Deep Dungeons are difficult. Obviously, there's like a couple of them that are here and there are a little trickier than others. But I strongly believe that, given time, or not even time, but just any player could learn mechanics of a Deep Dungeon fairly quickly without too much guidance. But I think what makes it more hardcore for me is the persistence and the consistency that you have to play with, especially depending on the Deep Dungeon solo experience you're talking about. When I think about ultimates, right, they're sort of like the pinnacle of team rating. They require a higher level of mastery of the job you're playing. You have to be able to execute mechanics precisely, and you have to be able to work together in a group with other people for this one goal. But and I'm well aware this is probably not true for everyone, but for me, ultimates don't really have that much variability. It's, a set pattern. Maybe the pattern has some randomness to it, but if you let me focus on that and only that and know exactly what comes next, I have a much easier time, right? People, at least for Fru, I think I cleared it it took me, I think, 10 to 12 weeks. So I wasn't in a hardcore group. It was very mid-core. But ultimates, at maximum are what, 25 minutes. I don't think I actually enter your 25 minutes nowadays, but Fru was like an 18-minute grueler. But even that, 18 minutes is nothing to me compared to sort of having to focus for 45 to an hour when it comes to Deep Dungeons, where literally any mistake could potentially be the end. And then there's the added, element of ultimates are the biggest difficulty of an ultimate to me is finding that team, making sure we're all on the same page. And then Deep Dungeons, on the other hand, I think are very punishing, especially solo. I think the variability, like I said, I keep talking about variability, but I think that is what adds that level of depth and that level of differentiation to me. And that's the true difficulty of the solo. No one run is ever the same. You'll never know if you hit a luring or if you accidentally aggro the wrong mob, what your palmanders are going to look like. So to me, it's almost a paralysis of choice, right? Being able to think on your feet and how to handle the current situation, and then even survive something that went wrong while still setting up for success in the future. The best way I like to describe it is I can watch an ultimate guide or an ultimate POV from, whatever job I'm playing. And for the most part, my POV, I can match the POV and get the clear. With Deep Dungeon, I've watched a lot of your POVs. I've watched a lot of Finh POVs, but no one run. I'm never going to be able to replicate exactly what you did in the video because your layout is going to be different from my layout. Your usage is going to be different from my usage. Your RNG is going to be different than my RNG. So I think, to wrap this back up to the question, do I consider soloing a Deep Dungeon casual, hardcore, in between? I think I would put it on probably the closer end of the spectrum to hardcore. And that's mostly because of the time investment and the need to focus for so long especially compared to any other content in the game.
So to kind of follow that up, would you consider the raid scene, you have the normals, the savages, the ultimates, and the extremes, I suppose. Would you basically say all the ultimates available appropriately sit within an ultimate category? Would you take one and say it's not quite an ultimate, or would you say all of them kind of are they are ultimates to me in a way?
I would say that there's definitely a hierarchy within the ultimate tier. Even if we think about what the community, and this is what, just sort of generalizing, but the community sort of thinks Uwu is the easiest sort of ultimate. And even then, I would still say it definitely is a step above other content in 14, but I would not put it on the same level as a top or a T or a Fru or a DSR because you can recover from so many different things. And I think that I could translate that to Deep Dungeons as well.
So would you then kind of consider if you're using U as the bottom level, I suppose, would you say that actually is closer to a savage, or would you still say that is totally an ultimate, just just a lower, I guess, a quote unquote easier version of the ultimate?
I would still call an ultimate because the difference between, I think, to me, an ultimate and a savage fight, and I know a lot of final tier savages have lately been doing sort of this sort of two boss approach, but to me, the difference between an ultimate and a savage is the length that you're there for. So even with Uwu, the bosses themselves die pretty quickly, but there's still 4 phases. That is still double what most final tier savage fights have. and there's no reset, right? You get to a certain point, you're done, you go back to the beginning. There is no sort of checkpoint. I know DSR has its own checkpoint, so kind of, but yeah, I would definitely still think, even if Uwu is the quote unquote easier of the ultimates, and this isn't to sort of diminish anyone who's cleared Uwu, because I still think that is an achievement on its own. I would still put it in its own category of ultimates.
That's completely fair. And actually, I was using this example only because it was interesting when you said at the beginning of the question was that you kind of feel like, if I misinterpreted, but like you kind of would distribute the deep dungeons almost in slightly different categories. Like you would probably consider one maybe an ultimate, but maybe another one would be kind of like savage. Is that kind of how you were kind of explaining it in a way? Or would they all sit in like a certain section? Like you were saying, like right about that hardcore, like they're all there. Like all four of them are kind of just like within that, just slightly different, executions, difficulties, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would still put them all in their own tier or level of challenge. I would say I would definitely have like my own ranking of the 4 deep dungeon solo experiences, but I definitely do think they are in of themselves a different tier of difficulty. Even when you think about just clearing a deep dungeon normally, I strongly believe that the sort of 4-person clear or even 2-person clear is significantly different than the solo experience. It's almost, not that it's not comparable, but it's not really a great setup to what soloing is going to be like. I guess the best parallel I can make is like the jump from extreme to ultimate is what I would say, a 4-person clear of PT is versus a solo clear of PT.
It's definitely not easy. I know that there's lots of content creators, you and Willow come to mind, who make it look really, really easy, but it's kind of like looking at a duck on the water. Yeah, it's sitting there, it looks graceful, it's perfect, but it's doing a lot of work where you can't see it. So, while it looks easy, I've had people who've told me that I make savage rating look easy, but that's just because I'm comfortable, I'm in my element, and I know what I'm doing. So it's definitely, I don't want to say it's hard. I don't want to say it's like hardcore, because I wasn't going for like a week 1 clear, and you can kind of go at your own pace, but it's somewhere in the middle. It's probably mid hardcore, I think, somewhere on that scale. Maybe a lot of dedication, a lot of time, and you have to be serious about it, but there is a little bit of leeway in how you get to approach it.
You have quite a lot of rating experience, yes.
Yeah, I started rating back in Endwalker. Technically at the end of Shadowbringers, but I was still learning and I had no idea what I was doing, so I don't count it.
And you've done some ultimates yourself?
Yeah, I have cleared T twice.
Okay, so just kind of setting the stage for the kind of a follow-up question here, but based on kind of your rating experience and how 14 likes to categorize the difficulties of the raid, you get normal, unreal, extreme, savage, ultimate, so on and so forth. Where would you kind of put your PT experience in that kind of categorization?
Probably high-end extreme. And mostly it's just because of length of time more than anything. The floors themselves are long, but then when you go to the bosses, they have fairly straightforward mechanics. Obviously, if you've seen them for the first time, you don't know what they're doing, you're probably going to die, but that's the same for any extreme level content, I think. So I think that's about where it goes.
And you'd say like time investment into the content is a pretty big kind of thing for you, like that kind of determines like a casual or hardcore situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, every floor set takes anywhere from the early ones take probably like 20 minutes, but like on average 30 to 45 minutes, just to get to the 9th floor and then kill the boss. I know I definitely have been staring at that clock as it slowly ticks down, wondering, am I going to have enough time to fully explore this floor? Do I have to cut it short? So there's just the tactical aspect of, I know exactly what's coming and I have a solution that can do it, but it's not as set in stone as like a Savage's, where it's just like, you need to have these resources at these times in order to complete it. It is a little bit more flexible, like an Extreme, where it's like, I know this is coming. I have several options. Which one of these is going to be the best option for it?
I think it depends on how you approach it. So if you're someone that's like, hey, I want to solo this deep dungeon, I'm just gonna go in, do 1 or 2 sets a couple of hours a day. That could be considered casual. But what if you're someone who is you're putting in a lot of time outside of deep dungeon too? Like you're watching your VODs, Finn's VODs, Aurora's VODs, like these long POTD VODs that are 8+ hours, and then you're going in that same day and you're busting out like 5 to 6 sets. That could be like a hardcore type of grind. So I think it depends on how much effort that you're putting into it while you're playing and outside of the actual content. to really say, if you're doing this casual or hardcore. I think that I approached Deep Dungeon pretty hardcore because I did used to raid a lot, so I would treat the study version pretty serious outside of playing the content, where I would study everyone's VODs any chance that I got, and then finally when I was able to play, then I had all this knowledge ready, and I was able to try and get farther and farther as much as I could.
So you would say time investment is a big factor to that determination of like casual hardcore, in your opinion?
Yes, yeah. Time, the more time that you put into it, I think plays a huge factor into whether you're a casual gamer or a hardcore gamer. And I think that goes for any game or any kind of like activity that you're doing.
I would like to consider it a hardcore aspect of the game, and I think probably if we were having this discussion like 4 years ago, I think people would quite unanimously agree that it was hardcore. I think it's leaning towards being more and more casual, and the barrier to entry now is kind of like the perceived difficulty from years and years ago. And like even at like the level 60 cap for Palace, some jobs are so much stronger now than they used to be. And like there's some that are obvious, right? Like Black Mage now compared to Black Mage any number of expansions ago is like universes of power different. Pictomancer exists now, Sage exists now, like even Astro, like I'm not saying Astro's easy, right? But it's significantly more approachable than it ever has been. Machinist has had buffs to its like 1, 2, 3 and drill like every single raid patch because the raiders hate Machinist, which just plays to our benefit every single time. It's hilarious. And there's strong jobs in like, like 4 years ago, people would be like, oh, what do I do? And everyone was like, oh, you do warrior or you do machinist. And now it's like, oh, you want to play melee? There's ninja, there's reaper. You want to play ranged? Like, you know what? Behemoth sucks, but they're kind of all really good. You want to play healer? Like, you can play scholar, you can play sage, you can play white mage. Just like maybe stay away from Astro. You want to play caster? They're all good. Like, and that's okay. Like, I would rather see the content being tried by people than left to the side because they think it's going to be too difficult. And I think that Pilgrim's Traverse is a really good, accessible entry point to the content, and that's probably a good thing overall. But we kind of still have to see like if there's any conversion rate on it bringing people back to try the older stuff. And I guess for me, that's kind of the important part, right? Like, is I don't mind, like, there's been power creep over the years, and I'm not here to do the whole, like, oh, congratulations on getting Necromancer. It was harder years ago, because, I mean, I did it on Sage, right? I did it on easy mode too. But, like, I'm kidding. There's no easy mode for Necromancer. But, like, I did it on a version that didn't exist originally, and it's never going to be as hard as it was, and that's fine. It's just a shame to see, like, every deep dungeon seems to get easier and easier at the moment.
So your answer to the question essentially is based on our current iteration of what deep dungeons look like in general? Meaning, are you viewing it with the way PT exists, or do you have almost like a separate categorization of the deep dungeons? Like maybe one is a little bit more hardcore than the other, or are you kind of just clumping them together in that category?
I think I would say they probably get more hardcore the further back in time you go. Like, I still think Palace and Heaven on High are a little bit more hardcore to do a solo clear in than, like, Eureka and Pilgrims are. But I think that, like, the gap between, like, 3 expansions ago and now, like, I would say it's a lot more casual than it's ever been.
Okay. And I know you've done some rating, you've done some ultis and everything. So if we were to use, like, the rating scale of difficulty, where you have normals, unreal, extreme, so on and so forth, where would you kind of put the deep dungeons in those categories, in your opinion?
Oh, that's not on the script.
No, it's not.
So I would probably put like Pilgrims as a start of expansion extreme. And so what I mean by this is like traditionally the devs tune down content at the start because they make allowances for people learning and making adjustments to jobs from the previous expansion. And they always try and make like a floor where people can enter the content type from, right? So like the first raid tier is generally tuned easier mitigation and damage check wise to allow people to step into the content for the first time if they haven't before. And I think Pilgrims is kind of the same, right? Where like it's very much like that entry, like onboarding point for the content for a lot of people. I think Eureka it's really hard for me to say, I guess, for Eureka because it's the one that I've done the least. like I don't think it's really any more difficult than Pilgrims is. I just think that because everything takes longer to kill, the focus the focus requirements a little bit higher. And so I would say like the difficulty is the same. It's just like it's like when you get an extreme that gives you 2 totems versus an extreme that gives you 1 totem, and the only reason is because it's a bit longer. You know, like I don't think it's asking you to do anything more difficult than what Pilgrims is doing. It's just asking you to do it for a longer period of time on average. And then I would say Heaven on High. Heaven on High is like one of those savage fights where the big wall is placed near the start of the fight. And I don't mean that Heaven on High is difficult at the beginning, but what I mean is you reach like your prog wall very, very quickly in Heaven on High, right? Like you kind of like rush through we'll say 1 to 60, because Onryos are probably the first thing that start killing people, right? And then once you hit that prog wall, you sort of like bat your face against it repeatedly for a little while. But then once that clicks and once you're like, oh, I've just understood that I can't face tank as a red mage. Or, you know, I've just worked out that I can do this on this job. Or I've just worked out that, like, I should be stunning to remove auto attacks and letting them do casts kind of thing on melee. You know, like, once you, like, start to get these little tricks under your belt, which we would all call sort of fundamentals, I guess, then you start making really rapid progress again through the end of it, in my opinion. And then maybe you hit like another wall a little bit further in when you get to like 81 plus or like 76 plus, and the mob starts slapping you for unfair amounts of damage. So I'd say it's kind of like one of those savage fights, and they can be like anywhere in the tier, but there are savage fights where you have like lights rampant like 3 minutes into the fight, and it's the thing that takes like 85% of the fight's prog time is like that one mechanic at the start of the fight. And then once you get through it, everyone's just like, oh, this fight's really easy. Like, I think that's kind of where Heaven on High sits for me, is like you reach your prog wall really quickly, and once you overcome it, you probably clear it pretty quickly, but that prog wall can take you a long time. And then I would say Palace is like the end boss. Like, I wouldn't say it's I would hesitate to say it's ultimate level. Like, I think the difficulty in Heaven on High and Palace are pretty similar. Palace does, of course, have like the bigger walls in that you have Behemoth and you have Godfather to deal with. You have probably the hardest set in any deep dungeon in 181 plus. And I think the final set being like so many proximity mobs that are dangerous is also like a unique challenge. So like I would say on average, also because your Pomanders are weakest overall there, I would say Palace is the most difficult. I would say it's probably closest to being like an end of tier savage fight on that scale. But I think that's literally like the 151 to 200 stretch. But I think most of the time when we talk about Palace difficulty, that's all we really talk about, right? So I think that's where I would put it.
And in kind of your definition of how you're kind of describing difficulty and hard and casual hardcore, what to you is the distinction of something being more hardcore as opposed to more casual?
For me, I guess it would be just like the perceived barriers to entry for the thing. Like, I don't think that a fight being difficult makes it hardcore, right? There's hundreds of casual statics out there that eventually clear a tier. It just takes them like months longer than a hardcore group because the hardcore group's throwing hundreds more hours into the content. And they're like a hardcore raiding static is typically going to be aligned with the intention of like, we want to kill this week 1 or week 2. Or whatever week, right? Depending on how hardcore they are, the statics goals. And like, I don't think that formula really works for talking about deep dungeons. Like, it's a solo journey, and like the only way you can really have any kind of time limit is if you set one yourself. You know, like, oh, I really want to get this done before the next patch comes out, and that's just kind of putting pressure on yourself for no reason. It's not like you have a group of 8 people that are like, oh yeah, we're all here to do this one thing together. So for me, I think it's just like the perceived barrier to entry is where it becomes hardcore or not, because there are people that are like, oh, I'm not going to do Palace because it's too long. Oh, I don't want to get to Behemoth just to get stuck on it, you know, like, which is where I think like the more hardcore elements come from. And like the others, like, oh, I could see myself, you know, I've heard people say, oh, I could see myself doing Pilgrims because it seems a lot more achievable. And I don't know what they mean. You know, I don't necessarily know what they mean by that, right? But at least in their heads, they're like, you know, if I was going to solo one, this is the one that feels accessible. And I guess that makes it a little bit more casual in that sort of ranking.
That's a great question. I would consider it hardcore in terms of the preparation needed and the mental toll it can take. But at the same time, I'd consider it casual and that anyone and everyone is capable of it given enough time, practice, patience, and improvement. I don't know. I'm pretty new to the deep dungeon experience, so maybe that's not like, maybe that's a hot take or something, but...
No, not at all. I mean, I actually appreciate that. And kind of a follow-up question was, I guess, kind of in your definition, you feel like the accessibility of the content allowed it to be more casual? Is that kind of how you defined it in a way?
Well, I can't say for sure because I've never really seriously tried POTD or Heaven on High solo. So maybe those experiences might be a little bit easier than EO. But this is just me, like, kind of gauging from afar. But I do think that the accessibility, it makes it less mentally imposing, right? Because if you need that practice at a later level, it's not so much a grind from like 31 plus anymore. You can, queue in from a higher set and kind of prepare yourself mentally. Because I feel like I think this is kind of a universal experience. As you get to the next floor set, your anxiety kind of builds up. So having that experience and these later floor sets ahead of time, I think definitely makes you more confident going into it.
So I imagine you would consider an ultimate hardcore, especially because it's kind of locked behind like a higher tier savage, etc. Right?
Yeah, I would consider hardcore for that reason, and also because of just the requirement of people with you. You kind of need everyone on the same playing level, and I consider that hardcore just because it's hard to gather like 8 adults at the same time, capable of the same stuff, with the same mindset.
Yeah, that is certainly a factor. So then, in this case, would in your experience of just EO and PT, would you consider EO more hardcore than PT, or would you still kind of lump them together as more kind of on the casual side of like accessibility?
I definitely consider EO more hardcore than PT.
Okay.
Like going into PT, I went back into POTD for deep dungeon race that a friend of mine was having. Every time I stepped in, the moment anything slightly reminded me of EO, I'd literally my heart rate would spike. I'd freak out. Be like, I remember when I first went into PT and saw the little chat message saying something calls out for warmth. I freaked out and I was like, does that mean there's like a dread beast or something? So yeah, it's definitely hardcore. It's definitely left some mental scars on me, and I feel like it's a good gauge for whether or not something is hardcore or not in the game for me.
Damn. Okay. that's pretty interesting. Okay, that's fair. All right. Yeah, no, that's interesting because I've certainly heard many different kind of viewpoints on like what they consider casual hardcore, not just the POV of Deep Dungeon, but almost how they define what they consider hardcore. So I was just kind of curious about kind of your definition, So
Mhm. Yeah, my definition might be a little bit more unique to me, but yeah, sorry.
No, and I mean, look, in my opinion, there really shouldn't be a universal definition of that. I mean, it should
Yeah.
really be kind of your own personal, because really, who's to really judge like what is to you what you consider hardcore? Because I mean, especially in your unique case, I mean, if I had you do something that required you to hit like 900 buttons presses per second, I mean, you're gonna get obliterated because you literally
Yeah.
physically can't do that. So for you, that's hardcore, right? So it's
Yeah.
very much a personal thing.
This one is a little tricky. I would say for the most part that it's an in-between thing. It's like definitely not casual, right? But solo deep dungeon also isn't really a single challenge. It's like a pretty wide net of allowing the player to create their own challenge. So like the way I did it, like playing on one of the stronger jobs and like abusing pommanders and stuff, that's one way of doing it. But also I've heard people clearing on Conjure, which is completely insane. And that has to be qualified as hardcore, I think.
So like the ability to kind of tweak the same challenge, but then engage it in different ways, kind of gives it a kind of a wider range of how whether it's more easier or harder in your opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
I found this a very difficult question to answer, mostly because I mean they're very relative terms. I still would see it maybe depending a bit on the deep dungeon and how much you've done it, but I would at least see PT solo as, well, mid-core, as much as that term still has meaning. I would probably see Palace of the Dead at the very least as hardcore. And then I'm mostly, of course there's the difficulty of it, but I'm also looking a lot into the time investment needed. Because I think Palace of the Dead is probably the most time-demanding deep dungeon to solo, and I think for a decent amount of people, just that time investment alone, I would see it as hardcore for that alone, honestly. It just costs a lot of time. Not everyone has that, so. But in terms of how hard they are for me nowadays, I would not say, at least in terms of difficulty, I would say PT is not really hard. Have it on high, Palace of the Dead, perhaps, but not PT. It's dependent on the deep dungeon itself, I'd say.
And in your kind of definition of kind of casual hardcore, for you, time is a big factor of that kind of categorization.
I mean, if I, because honestly, I'd rather in terms of like seeing some as casual hardcore, I would kind of separate time and difficulty a bit, but in Deep Dungeon's case, well, they're all pretty time intensive, so it's not much of a distinction there. But in terms of difficulty, it's also a different skill set, which differentiates from the rest of the game quite a lot. So if you're very familiar with roguelites, then you might not see him as that hardcore, but someone who's only ever done a Savage rating and is not used to this at all could 100% see it as hardcore. I think I would, for me it would just depend on the Deep Dungeon itself. Balzadat would still kind of be hardcore for me, but PT more mid-core, mostly because it's easier and doesn't take as long. One factor is actually nowadays, Deep Dungeons are very hardcore just because there's DDoSes all the time.
Yeah, you're telling me. If you were to kind of use, let's say, raid categorizations for the Deep Dungeons, I imagine you would kind of put, whether or not you agree that it is this level, Palace of Dead being kind of the equivalent to an ultimate, and that could be, if you want to go into that, it's fine. But so if you put Palace as an ultimate, kind of where would you put then, like maybe the other three, or if anything, PT?
I would put Heaven on High as Savage, I'd say, and then both Eureka, Orthos, and PT as extremes, with PT being an easier extreme.
So if we're talking difficulty compared to our content in the game, then I think it's harder than any casual content, like the roulettes, treasure maps, Nightspur crafting, etc. However, I think it's significantly easier than what you'd consider the more advanced content, like extreme, savage, ultimates, expert crafts, etc. If I'd put a number on it, if we say Dungeon Roulette is about 2 out of 10, and a Turn 4 Savage is about a 8.5 out of 10, and I think Soloing PT would be about a 4.5 out of 10. So, kind of in the middle, but a little more skewed towards the roulettes than towards the savages. Like, I would say Soloing Deep Dungeon in general, I don't think it's that hard. It can go up and down depending on the job, what Deep Dungeon, what kind of run you're doing, but like, the typical solo Deep Dungeon on like an okay job, I don't think it's that difficult. Keep in mind all of this, though, is just looking at 14 in vacuum, because I don't think it's generally a very difficult game. Like, I've never done a sales pitch of 14 and then, and then introduced it as a very difficult game. I think it's more of a casual game that has like, and in that casual game context, then there's things that are like hard in that context, that harder in that context, such as Savage, and then Deep Dungeon a little bit before that.
So you said kind of soloing Deep Dungeon, would you say like a 4.5 out of 10?
Yeah.
Would you encompass all 4 in a 4.5, or would you have a variance of numbers between the Deep Dungeons?
To me, like, if I took all the Deep Dungeons and added them up together, I think a 4.5, that would be about what I would give it. And then if we think of like the hardest one, let's say PUTD, then I think soloing PUTD is maybe like a 6. Then I think soloing PT is probably like a, 4. And then your recover toast maybe a 4.5, and then I is a 5. Like, they're kind of like in that range, yeah. But I do not think soloing is harder than a Savage.
I consider soloing any Deep Dungeon as a hardcore content in Final Fantasy. The time spent on just attempting to clear is an insane amount and compares to any 4th floor Savage turn in week 1 proc. But what especially makes this content hardcore to me is the insane amount of knowledge you have to carry into each floor set. There are around 10 to 15 mobs per floor with each different abilities and attributes, like are they stunnable, interruptible? Do they eat away one of your commanders like steel? And how they aggro, like sound, proximity, sight, or anything of the combined from the previous 3. There are also like 10 different bosses, each with around 3 different kinds of mechanics, various floor effects, 16 base commanders plus 3 different, like in PT, there are the instances, while in Eureka Orpheus, there are the demi-clones. So, and you should also know each of their effects and where they're located, especially for an emergency situation when you walked into a luring by accident and you had to use a witching.
Okay, so you kind of consider like the time investment like an important part of why you kind of consider it hardcore?
I think the time investment and the knowledge you have to carry into each of the floor sets I consider itself as a hardcore experience. What is hardcore? Hardcore is mostly like time investment and knowledge you have to spend, and Deep Dungeon soloing is one of those experiences in Final Fantasy where you have to spend an immense amount of resources in total to clear it.
I would say it's a hardcore. From what I know of the previous Deep Dungeons, I would say it's a hardcore piece of content because they require like a lot of prior knowledge and studying beforehand, and it's a pretty big time investment to, from when you start doing the content to when you get the end. I think it's good that you can take breaks, so it makes it less hardcore, but I think just the amount of like knowledge you need to clear things makes it more hardcore, but I think PT makes it more of a bridge between casual and hardcore content compared to the other soloing deep dungeon experiences from what I know of them.
I think it depends on kind of how you approach it, but I think that like the older deep dungeons like Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High are a little more hardcore to clear solo, while Eureka Orthos and PT are, I would call them like mid-core. I wouldn't call them super casual because you still need some knowledge about what's going on and what you're getting into.
So, kind of in your own definition of like casual hardcore, what makes it differentiate between a casual or hardcore experience?
I think just the amount of like knowledge and time that you have to kind of put into it to know how to deal with certain situations and what enemy does what, and definitely like the time aspect is more on the side of hardcore, I think.
So kind of like a mix of the two, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it just kind of like depends on like do you find the bosses challenging? Do you find the enemies challenging?
Well, for PT in particular, I would say it's in between. Like we just said, I would say it's about an extreme level difficulty. From what I've seen from Heaven on High and like in the higher floors, I would definitely say hardcore. Though there's one thing which is very different here, which is just the amount of time it takes, right? That's a big factor. So while the difficulty itself, like the execution and the knowledge and that kind of thing you need to clear a solo PT, I would say it's about an extreme level. There is a huge time commitment, which is, I think it'll make, depending on what you value and what you like, what would be a bigger obstacle to you, right? So I can easily imagine someone who is willing to do ultimates and savage raiding and learn all those very difficult fights, but at the same time just not willing to dedicate 4 hours to a single attempt of one of these dungeons, right? So in that sense, I would say it's just on the difficulty. I would say it's in between, but when it comes to like time commitment, I would say it's more hardcore.
Kind of jumping off kind of what you said there, what, in your opinion, at least in your type of gaming and everything, do you consider a challenge for you?
Challenge. I usually what do you mean? Like challenge for like what I enjoy is a challenge? What
Yeah.
I think is challenging.
Good follow-up question. I think in your eyes, like when you play a game, even in 14 or any other game, like what is it to you that deems it as a challenge that you're willing to engage with? Because like you were mentioning, like the time commitment is a
yeah.
factor, but it may not be a factor that you wanna engage with, right? And for you, ultimates, the PF experience right now is kind of just not quite there, just because of whatever is involved with it, right? So if you're kind of seeking out a challenge, what would your kind of preferred style be?
Well, I would say both. Final Fantasy XIV is a weird section, I think, because I do really enjoy savage raiding, but it's also weird because in a lot of other games I tend to get a lot, when it's talking about like competitive games, for example, any kind of team-based competitive game, I usually get frustrated from having to depend on other people and feeling like I get punished or lose in any way because of mistakes other people made. So in that sense, Final Fantasy XIV is a bit of an exception for me with how much I enjoy raiding, and I don't really mind. Well, I do mind obviously dying in prog and losing attempts because other people make mistakes, but because I just play on PF, I can just leave, right? If I feel someone is griefing or playing just too badly, and you just find another party, right? So, but in that sense, I really like, I guess, the challenge of just learning a fight in 14. I also like the execution of playing a job properly in this game. But compared to other games, for example, I don't really enjoy fighting games. Probably because the execution barrier is too high for me. So I don't really appreciate like big, super precise or difficult execution, like physical execution of pressing the buttons correctly. I usually just prefer more knowledge and learning, and which I think is a lot more interesting and is seen a lot more in extreme and savage raiding. Just learning the fight and being able to adapt to things that go wrong sometimes. Other games I enjoy usually are like roguelikes, for example, which is related to Deep Dungeon, of course, but I enjoy games like Dead Cells and that kind of thing. So games where you have to both have like execution barrier, but not that high, and most of the challenge comes from just knowledge and planning and adapting to things that change, right?
So you kind of like the strategy and kind of the puzzle solving aspects of the games.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the same with fighting games. Like I look at fighting games, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm just gonna do something else.
I do like fighting games. I like weird fighting games, you know? Like there's this game I really like called Made on a Spell,
Okay.
which if you've heard Rabbit in a Steel, have you heard about that game? Which game became popular last year?
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, it's by the same creator. It's the creator's previous game,
Mhm.
and I really click with that game because I do also like bullet hells a lot, and I really like the experience of fighting game. But I just I guess I just don't click with like usual the traditional fighting games where you have to learn these long combos, and also I can never deal with motion inputs myself. I really struggle with those.
Mhm.
So, but I do like the competition. I do like the 1v1 aspects. So I think that's like a weird part of my relationship with fighting games.
Yeah, no, it's fair. Whatever makes you happy, right? I mean, we play games to have fun,
Yeah.
so we'd rather not get overly frustrated in something that we just want to have fun with.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching part 2 of the PT interviews. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, and hang tight for part 3. If you like this video, be sure to like and share it with your friends. If you like more videos like these where we talk to the community about Deep Dungeon Solo, be sure to let me know. The success of these videos will determine if we do more. Take care,